Dobar dan, dobrodošli na 7. po redu Prolećni VIVALDI Forum. Već mi je jasno da će biti uzbudljivo. Drago mi je da vidim da se iz godine u godinu pomeraju generacije i da dolazi sve više mlađih ljudi i drago mi je da vidim da svake godine dolazi sve više preduzetnika. Tako da imamo jednu dobru formulu koja bi glasila ovako: uspešnost i kreativnost foruma je jednaka tome da su političari nula, odnosno da ih nema, da nisu prisutni, da su preduzetnici u plusu i da su mladi u plusu i ta hemija je odlična. To je u duhu one osnovne teme vodeće za ovu godinu, a to je promene. Svi maštamo o tome kako bi voleli da se nešto promeni. Preduzetnici bi voleli da, na primer, im država pomogne, zato se ova godina zove godina preduzetništva. Mladi bi voleli da mogu da napreduju u karijeri, da dobiju poslove, da im se ostvare svoji snovi. Stariji bi voleli da budu priznati, prepoznati i poštovani za ono što su ceo život radili, tako da sve u svemu ne postoji ni jedan segment društva u kome mi živimo koji nema šta o nečemu što u stvari nemamo. Izgleda da je jedini put da se pomeramo je da se krećemo u granicama mogućeg. I sad, kogod je pravio velike korake u svom životu, karijeri ili poslu, on zna koliko je mučno i teško primenjivati takozvanu teoriju malih koraka, gde svakog dana moraš da čekaš ili svake godine da napraviš neki mali ustupak ili neki mali napredak, ali izgleda da je za dugovečnost jedne organizacije, jedne sredine pa i jednog društva ogromna količina malih koraka ključ i za to je potrebno veliko strpljenje. Tako smo mi čekali 7 godina da bi danas imali, na primer, live streaming i pozdravljam sve one koji nas slušaju i gledaju preko interneta. Danas ja mogu da mahnem u pravcu kamera. Imaćemo svih ovih razgovora direktno pokrivanje i postavljanje pitanja ljudi preko društvenih mreža i našim gostima, govornicima, ujedno i, da kažem, publici koja učestvuje. Za one koji su ovde prvi put, oni treba da znaju da je srž ovih naših skupova i druženja u tome da razgovor ovde počinje od samog početka. Uvodničari, predavači, moderatori su tu da stimulišu vaša pitanja, vaše diskusije i razgovore. Za to ima dosta vremena. Ako čovjek razvuče da od danas do subote u podne imamo, znači koliko, nešto malo manje od 48 sati minus nekoliko sati spavanja, imaćete prilike ili imaćemo prilike da o raznim važnim pitanjima i pitanjima koja nas zanimaju pričamo. Jedno tehničko pitanje. Svi koji ne razumiju engleski, a bit će ovaj panel i sledeći panel delimično na engleskom i srpskom, tamo su slušalice i imamo obezbeđen simultani prevod i u tom smislu smo i napredovali i u tom domenu. Nekoliko reči oko tema koje smo izabrali za ovaj forum. Počinjemo sa perspektivom u kom pravcu ide svet, jer bez toga ne možemo da razumemo kako mi da se krećemo. Nalazimo se na čuvenim večitim prekretnicama, da li smo na istoku ili smo na zapadu, da li ćemo se mi pridružiti i snaći u ovoj i onoj asocijaciji, ovom onom udruženju, kakva je sudbina Balkana, kakva je sudbina Centralne Evrope, pa onda samim tim kakva je sudbina naših porodica i nas lično u poslovima u kojima živimo i radimo. I u tom smislu ćemo početi sa prvim panelom. Malo kasnije ću predstaviti posebno našeg dragog gosta. Druga tema o kojoj ćemo pričati je to, preduzetništvo, godina preduzetništva, ideje na tu temu. Tu će biti gost naš kolega Daniel Boehi, koji je jedan od vrsnih međunarodnih eksperata od Nestlea, Unilevera i tako dalje, i njegovi govornici, gosti koji su svi preduzetnici u različitim segmentima. Sutra ćemo početi dan sa novim trendovima u poslovanju. Ko je pratio Kopaonički biznis forum, mogao je da čuje Ćulibrka, urednika NIN-a, kako je govorio i kakvo je njegovo viđenje situacije u privredi Srbije. Mislim da je ta vrsta zdravog razuma i čestite i precizne analize važna, naročito za nas koji se stvarno bavimo realnim poslom, da se ne zavaravamo i da ne padnemo slučajno u neku vrstu iluzije da su stvari bolje nego što u stvari jesu. Pitanje regionalizacije i tema koja se zove od Vardara pa do Triglava, suština te teme je svi smo mi dovoljno mali, sva ova tržišta su toliko mala da je jedina stvar koja može pomogne neka vrsta ekonomije skale, povećanja regiona i gledanje uopšte kako da izađemo preko ovog našeg lokalnog plota u kome radimo. Bez zaposlenih i bez novih generacija nam budućnosti u upravljanju nema. Stvari su se mnogo promenile u poslednjih 20 godina. Priča se o tim generacija X, generacija Y, generacija Z, millennials i već kako se to sve ne zove. Sa nama će posle podne sutra biti Marijana Agić-Molnar, koja će govoriti o tome kakva nas radna snaga i kako da se snalazimo sa tom generacijom millennialsa sa kojima već u stvari radimo i živimo, a možda ih najbolje ne razumemo. Ja lično bih voleo da me svrsta neko, ako može, preko veze u tu generaciju, se tako osjećam. Pitanje lične inicijative od mene do promene, to je panel koji ćemo raditi sutra posle podne. Ja ću biti domaćin te teme. Lična inicijativa, različiti ludaci, da se izrazim onako pod znacima navoda, koji investiraju svoje vreme, trud i energiju da naprave nešto drugo, a što nije možda profitabilno, što ne bi pokrila, što ne bi banka kreditirala biznis planom. Zašto je to važno, zašto su te inicijative i potrebe važne, o tome pričamo sutra posle podne. Sutra uveče takozvani kulturno-zabavni program. Nikad ni u jednoj agendi foruma nismo tačno navali šta to znači. Podsjećam vas da obično sa tih događaja nema fotografija na Facebooku, nema slika i tako, da ne bi ljudi stekli pogrešan utisak da se mi ovde zabavljamo i tako da to i vama lično savjetujem da isključite kamere kad sutra bude uveče muzika. Subota pre podne imamo onaj jagodu sa šlagom na sladoledu. Pitanje da li je Srbiji potrebna elita ili nam uopšte nije potrebna nikakva elita, pa divno nam je ovako i elita u stvari mogu da budu zvezde, farme ili neko ko u stvari nema školu, a svi treba da ga poštujemo i tako dalje. Pa o tome će razgovarati Aleksandar Gajšak sa Studija B u okviru živog snimanja emisije Agape, a njegovi sagovornici će biti tu Matija Bećković, akademik, i Emir Kusturica, naš domaćin ovde. Mislim da će to biti dosta zanimljivo. Koliko čujem, njih dvojica se ozbiljno spremaju za taj događaj i imaju probe oko toga šta će da kažu, tako da to će nam biti jedno dodatno iznenađenje. Sad, pošto je DNK škole takav da mi promovišemo zdrav život, aktivan život i tako dalje, sa nama je ovde i ujutru, sutra i uveče, danas i sutra uveče, za one koji su poneli sportsku opremu, a ja se nadam da su svi poneli sportsku opremu i ove trikoje i baletanke, koleginica Nevena Mašić iz studija One Body, koji bi na srpskom bio prevod jedno telo, jedna duša, jedno telo, ona će da bude zadužena da se vi svi rekreirate i da se osjećate dobro, tako da vas ja ovom prilikom pozivam da je večeras počnemo sa tim od 7 uveče u sali, na neku vrstu lagane rekreacije i druženja. pošto mislim da nisam ništa u tom smislu zaboravio, da počnemo sa našim uvodnim predavanjem. Gospodin Asl Toje je naš, sad već mogu da kažem, drug iz Norveške. Mi smo se upoznali pre nekoliko godina kada je jedan profesor sa Londonske škole ekonomije i političkih nauka, gospodin Michael Cox, bio jedan od govornika na forumu. On je rekao, ja hoću da dođem u Srbiju, pošto znam da ste vi Srbi ludi, ja vas obožavam. Vi ste isti kao Norvežani. I juče mi je usput objašnjavao kako su u stvari Srbi i Norvežani isto i davao mi je gomilu saveta šta bi mi Srbi trebali da uradimo. Asli je jedan od vodećih eksperata evropskih na temu geopolitike. On je jedan od saradnika u Nobelovom institutu u Oslu. Kuriozitet bi recimo mogao da bude, juče smo razgovarali o tome da Nobelov institut u Oslu koji radi nominacije za Nobelove nagrade i tako dalje, nije promenio broj zaposlenih od svog osnivanja, a to je bilo pre 100 i nešto godina. Imaju, mislim, 4 ili 5 zaposlenih. I nema povećanja, što kaže Englezi, headcounta. Drži se broj zaposlenih na istoj meri i rade te poslove koje rade. Asli inače je doktorirao na Cambridgeu, istoričar je po osnovnom obrazovanju, otac je 2 dece i radujem se da će imati priliku da se sa vama i sa nama druži ovde. Tako da proglašavam da je naš forum otvoren i vama sa live streama sve vas pozdravljam, a Aslu prepuštam reč. Aslu, welcome and thank you for coming. That was a short introduction and floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So, dear friends, I'm here to address you on a topic that is one of those big topics, a question of a macro perspective. The title of the talk is A New World Disorder, Geopolitics in Europe. The issues that I intend to address to you here today is a story of how essentially good things are pursued to a point where good things turn sour, or perhaps more appropriately, stale. Some of you may know that the term the New World Order was a term that emerged in the wake of World War I with the joining of the League of Nations. It was the first step towards a world governed increasingly by supranational international organizations. And it is this order on a global level that is today under threat. The talk that I'm going to present today falls neatly into 2 categories. One is about the international system, the second part is about geopolitics in Europe today, starting with the international system. On the most profound level, what we have been witnessing over the past 2 decades is a change in polarity in the international system. Polarity is quite a simple term. It refers to the distribution of power between the constituent elements of an international order. And it's quite simple. A unipolar system has 1 primary actor, a bipolar system has 2, and a multipolar has several. The rivalry between Athens and Sparta in antiquity is a classical example of a bipolar rivalry, exactly the same as we saw on a global scale between the Soviet Union and the United States during the Cold War. The problem is that the world is no longer unipolar, at least not clearly unipolar. American power has been declining, and at the same time, a functioning multipolar system has yet to develop. Morton A. Kaplan, the famous Chicago School academician, argues that the number of poles for a functioning multipolar system it needs to have 5 poles at least. And the international system that emerged after World War II had an anticipation that the world would be, in fact, be multipolar. That is why there are 5 permanent members to the UN Security Council. But of course, as we all know, that did not come to pass. The Cold War was essentially a bipolar system. Then, after the end of the Cold War, we saw a lot of enthusiasm about an emerging multipolarity. A lot of acronyms were being bandied about: the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and who's this? The S. South Africa. Yeah, South Africa was even included in there, which is kind of counterproductive or counterintuitive, given that countries such as Germany and Japan are much more powerful than South Africa or Brazil, for that matter. There are different scales that we can use to gauge the level of power distribution in an international system. Various academicians choose different variables. Some focus on the economy, some focus on ideology or the means of production, institutional structures, or indeed just good old-fashioned military power. Basically, all these gauges tell much the same story, and that is that we are seeing a 2+1 multipolarity, where you have the United States and China in a league of their own, and Russia desperately trying to claw into this upper tier in international politics. At the same time, we have seen the decline of the Bretton Woods order. The Bretton Woods order is the institutionalized order that emerged in the wake of World War II, with a lot of the institutions that we now we take as more or less forgiven today, and I'm referring here to the United Nations, the IMF, the World Bank, and by extension, the EU and NATO. What is interesting today is that we see that all of these institutions are struggling in different ways. The institutionalized international order is in a flux, where on the one hand, it's being continually expanded, and it's being expanded in many ways in a more ambitious way than for decades, and at the same time we see that ever more states seem reluctant to live up to their international obligations, as they're usually referred to. This points towards a conflict between the internationalists and the nationalists of this world. This is a theme that I will return to in the case of Europe. We'll just put that to the side for now. But the main story is we live in a world today where the burdens of international citizenship, the burdens of statehood, are growing heavier. It's much more expected from states, from the international system today. And at the same time, we see that a lot of states are feeling uncomfortable with shouldering these burdens. The Libyan intervention of NATO is a case in point. When NATO intervened in Afghanistan, it was very much of a Three Musketeer type of intervention. Everybody had to go to Afghanistan. When NATO later intervened in Libya, a lot of the alliance just stayed home. They refused to partake. So it happened under a NATO flag, but a lot of the NATO members stayed out. This is a story that we have seen replicated time and time again. For instance, with the UN over the assistance to Syria, a lot of countries will in theory agree, but when it comes to paying up, everybody grows a lot less eager to participate. Edward Carr, the great British diplomat and scholar, wrote a book called The 20 Years Crisis. It was a book that was an attempt to analyze the decline of the interwar years, the order in Europe and the world between the two world wars, and how on earth we managed to get ourselves in a situation that only 20 years after World War I, we were back in World War again. What Carr points out, and I find these 3 points of Carr are particularly interesting for our present day. Basically, Carr argues that international orders tend to collapse when 3 things happen at the same time. The number 1 is a presence of powerful and resentful actors on the margins of the international order. 2, a profound and sustained disruption to the global economy. And 3, a diminished will on behalf of the actors, of the states, of the powers that are upholding the international system to do that work. And in some ways, this is exactly what we are seeing. Robert Gilpin, another scholar who wrote the book, let you some references here, another book, War and Change in the International Society, makes a very similar point, where he points to this balance between the haves and the have-nots, if you will, in an international system, where you have a group of states that has created an international system. Gilpin argues that every international system is a byproduct of war. It is a system that is established by the victorious powers after conflict. And then, as the system grows older, the vanquished foes and other actors rise within this system. This creates a sense of disappointment, if you will, amongst the system determining powers, in our case, primarily the United States. They have invested a lot of resources, money, attention into this international system, and they're surprised and often dismayed that the system has allowed for other powers to challenge them within this system. And this leads to a diminished will to uphold the rules of the system. And this is one of the challenges that we're currently seeing in the international system today, not least over Syria, where we've seen Russia openly challenging the American script for the resolution of the Syrian conflict and outfoxing the Americans in their own backyard, if we can still call the Middle East America's backyard. In sum, we're seeing a much less stable international system than we have in the past. And just to throw out another IR scholar, Hedley Bull from the London School of Economics, he wrote a book back in 1977 called The Anarchical Society. That is a reference to the international society, the international system, which Bull argues was governed by anarchy in some ways, and that in this anarchical system there is always a balance. The Asians really buy into this because it's a yin and yang type of logic. A balance between the powers of chaos and the powers of order in the international system. The powers of order include international laws, norms, rules, and including the rules for how to observe these laws, and also the rules for how to change them if a state is unhappy with that. Of course, the powers of anarchy are the powers that are not playing by the rules. And the level of chaos or order in the international system will always be determined by the relative benefits of complying by the rules, or playing by the rules, or breaking the rules. And what we have seen over the past few years is an increasing willingness on behalf of a lot of actors in Europe and globally to challenge established international laws and rules. Of course, this is not the domain of the Russias and the Chinas of this world alone, although that is the favored narrative in most European and North American countries. But as a matter of fact, many would argue that the American intervention in Iraq in 2003 was in many ways the opening salvo in this race towards not playing by the rules and pursuing the national interest as different states see them. So, where is this all going to head? There are basically, broadly speaking, 3 scenarios being bandied around in the international discourse about where the international system is going. The first is the friendly, and of course it's a scenario that is pushed around by a European, a friend of mine, Giovanni Grevi, and it's the perspective of interpolarity. What Professor Grevi does is basically he assumes that the sort of integration that we have seen in Europe will take place in various other parts of the world, the African Union, Mercosur, the Eurasian Union, and that these great big economic clusters will then interact with each other in the way that poles do in an international system. So you will have an international system that has a European pole, a Eurasian pole, an African pole, etc. And that due to economic interdependence, relations between these poles are going to be broadly favorable, broadly beneficial, because conflict is in nobody's interest. It's a sort of a win-win perspective. This is challenged by Richard Haass of the Council of Foreign Relations in New York, an American, and it's not unsurprising that an American comes out with the other scenario, the non-polarity scenario. He says, no, you're all wrong. All this talk of multipolarity is overblown. It's not happening. America is still number one, and it doesn't really make much sense to talk of polarity anymore. Power has been so dispersed amongst nation states, terrorist organizations, transnational organizations, international business conglomerates, that it makes no sense of talking of polarity in the old school sense. And this paradigm is quite popular, not least in the United States. Then another American, Bob Kagan, has written a book called The Return of History, which is by far the most scary scenario. And that is a scenario where Kagan argues that what we have experienced since World War II has been a holiday from history. The great two powers with their nuclear weapons, the Soviet Union and the United States, created an amazing amount of stability in the international system. The two actors were so powerful that they basically kept everybody else in check. And that we enjoyed the residual stability of this order for 20 years, 30 years after it actually physically ended with the end of the Soviet Union, because it had become so entrenched over time. But Kagan argues that soon enough we will see the specter of not only interstate warfare, which I know many here in Serbia will have a personal memory of, but also great power warfare, which is of course the most damaging and most loss-causing type of conflict in the world. I'm not going to make any predictions about what powers are going to end up fighting each other. I hope none. But if you take classical balance of power theory, it seems that the deal between Russia and China is kind of a deal made in heaven, where you have the United States that is much more powerful than Russia and China separately. But if you merge the economic muscles of the Chinese and the military muscles of the Russians together, you have something resembling a peer rival. So far, this has yet to come into play. Perhaps it is because of that old image where you know the image of the rider and the horse. In Moscow, I think they very much think of the partnership with China as the story, or the image with the rider and the horse, where the Russians are the rider and the Chinese are the horse. So the Chinese will provide the speed and the muscle, and the Russians will tell them where to go. Unfortunately for the Russians, Beijing doesn't really see it that way. But I don't think it's a very risky assessment to say that if there is conflict where Russia and China see that they have the same interest, these two powers will probably unite forces, and that will change the stability of the international system entirely. Why? Because the world that we have lived in, this very, very highly institutionalized world, is the result of conquest. It is a result of America's win in World War II. And it is a result of a distinctly Anglo-American view to commerce and free trade. It's a liberal order, which most of us in Western Europe, at least, we tend to love it very much, this order, but let's face it, it is an American order. And it's not seen the same way by all actors in the international system, particularly China and Russia. So far, the United States has been able to call the shots in this order, much the same way as they have been running NATO. NATO was, like the Warsaw Treaty Organization, an organization where essentially each state has one vote. But of course, it never worked like that. At the end of the day, the Americans called the shots in NATO. So I don't think NATO would ever intervened in Afghanistan if it hadn't been that the Americans pushed very hard for it. And there are plenty of examples that way. But much in the same way, you see that the World Trade Organization has been pushed forwards by an American belief in global free trade and in the so-called globalization and the globalization of American values. They're now, for the first time since the end of the Cold War, experiencing something that could resemble a pushback, primarily from Russia. And this is an interesting case because you see a Russia and a China that are very different. Whilst China has decided that power is primarily an economic thing, where they have tended to build their industrial base, build up their, take their collective corpus to the gym and become a really muscly, strong economy. The Russians, their economy is not working so well at all. They have gone the other way by building up a military force that we have not seen since the age of the Soviet Union. In 2020, Russia will be ready to fight a large-scale war with a peer rival, and it is a military force that can only be compared to that of the United States. The United States is still ahead, but they're not as far ahead as they used to be only 10 years ago. So you see a Russia that is militarily strong and economically weak, and a China that is militarily not really all that strong, but very strong economically. And what both of these powers, these aspiring powers, lack is diplomatic clout. They both suffer from acting and maneuvering in a system that is tailor-made for the United States, and they find it difficult to push their own agendas in this system. And this has led to a fair amount of resentment, especially in China, towards international institutions that, from the Bretton Woods order, and a push towards more Sino-centric organizations, where they make their own institutions, fashioning them to their own needs as a great power. I'm not going to make any prediction about where we are going to end up, whether we're going to end up in the interpolarity or in the non-polarity, whether that will endure or a return to history. But let me say that for the past years, since 2008, it seems clear that the forces of chaos in the international system has been surging ahead, and the forces of order has been locked in a defensive battle, trying to uphold the agreements that have already been made and frequently failing to do so. And that, my friends, leads us to the continent that is most close to our hearts, to our dear Europe. Geopolitics in Europe. Napoleon once said that geography is destiny, and I've gathered from having discussed with my Serbian friends that is a view that is quite popular here in Serbia. A lot of Serbs feel that you live in quite a bad neighborhood. Of course, Norway, my own country, we have our own challenges as well. I think that every country feel that they have their own challenges due to their geographical positioning. But geography also shapes politics, and this term geopolitics was actually coined by a Swedish political scientist named Rudolf Kjellén, and played into this view that is popular currently in Russia about the existence of land powers and the existence of sea powers, and that depending on how your country is situated, it will shape the national interests of your state, and it will shape how you act in the international system. And also, just to add to that, Rudolf Kjellén was very, very strict about the point that was later picked up by American political scientists, this notion that there is a big difference about what kind of actor you are in the international system. And this is something I will return to towards the end of the talk when I discuss the state of Serbia. Small states do not have the same possibilities in the international system as larger states. And Rudolf Kjellén, he makes a special case for former great powers, and we're here talking about countries such as Sweden and Austria. They also are different from countries that are only of a similar size, but who don't have that luggage, they don't have that history of being a great power. And of course, at the top of the pyramid, you have the big beasts. You have the great powers of the international order. And this is something that has been playing itself out in Europe over the past 5 to 6 to 7 years. Because Europe today, my friends, is divided. It is divided from east to west and from north to south. And of course, you can make the case that Europe has always been divided in one way or another, but what I'm trying to get at here is something that is a bit more recent and I believe a bit more enduring, something that will last. Since the end of the Cold War, the European Union launched itself into a period of an amazing expansion. For people like me who study international institutions, it has been extremely interesting to see how this most powerful of all institutions in the world has been evolving, branching into ever new policy fields, acquiring new powers, and acquiring an ever more sophisticated institutional framework. Things looked like this was a case of what the Treaty of Rome said, a case of ever closer union, that we were on a march towards an abolition, if not in theory, then certainly in practice, of the European nation states. So the 50-odd nation states in our region would somehow meld into a formidable actor, a union governed from Brussels and governed by, well, at least from the view of the European Union, good liberal Western values. Of course, this happiness was not to last. In 2008, the Euro crisis hit the European Union. And since 2008, the European Union has been in a persistent crisis since 2008. And there is very little to indicate that this is going to change. And what do I mean by persistent or consistent crisis? Well, basically, the European Union is an organization that works best when there's not much happening in the world, because it has its agenda, and then the leaders and the ministers for agriculture or what have you will meet and they will push the agenda forwards as it has been scripted. But over the past 7 to 8 years, we see a Europe that every single meeting has been a crisis meeting, a meeting to resolve some crisis that has happened where the European Union finds it difficult to resolve the challenges that it's confronted with. The Euro crisis was in many ways a response to a distinctly European mode of integration. You might call it chase the ball integration. So what the European Union traditionally has done is to declare a grand sounding goal, make up some acronyms, and then state that this has already happened. And then they will work feverishly to make it happen. So they say that it has happened, and then they will try to make it happen. This was the case with the common foreign and security policy, which is not common and is not about foreign policy or security policy, but they've been trying to make it happen. But it was also a case about the euro, where the European Union adopted a common currency before adopting common fiscal policies or common budget requirements. And the problem with having a common currency without having common fiscal policies was laid open in 2008, when the entire financial system of Europe was shaking and came very, very close to collapsing. In this situation, the EU found that its decision-making procedures was woefully inequipped to deal with an urgent crisis such as this. And in the wake, or in the absence of good voting procedures that could make the 28 member states come together and make forceful decisions, the Germans stepped into the breach. This has been a story waiting to be told. A Germany of 80 million people that is economically much more powerful than any other state in the European Union and is located at the core of the European Union, was always destined to have a leading role in European integration. For the longest time it was balanced by France, but for a long time France hasn't been doing so well economically, and it's been had also its own political troubles, and in some ways since 2008 France has abdicated in European politics. It's simply not the force that it used to be. And at the same time, we've seen that the British have started looking for the exit. They're going to have the referendum in June, and it's not a foregone conclusion that they will vote to stay in the European Union. I think on some level the language betrays our British friends, because all my British friends, they go on holiday to Europe. They don't see Britain as being part of Europe. Europe is a place they go to, not a continent that they see themselves as an integral part of. The euro crisis was managed, but at a heavy cost, because a European Union emerged, a union that does policy but not politics. And the problem with the European Union that is very powerful when it comes to laying down the terms of how various issues in international politics are to be addressed, from the migration crisis to the euro crisis to what have you, the European Union does not have the democratic legitimacy of the nation states. So you have the nation states that has politics, that has a system to generate from one man, one vote into political parties, into the parliament and into the government, and then into the policies of the government. That is the politics of the system. The EU does not have that kind of legitimacy, but at the same time is doing ever more of the policy that was traditionally the output of the nation states. And this gap in legitimacy has only been made more urgent by the rise of Germany. I might add that this has been a reluctant rise on behalf of Germany. It's not a position that the Germans have seized. It is a position that, at least to my mind, has been forced upon them by the lack of leadership and the lack of functioning political procedures in the EU. Henry Kissinger wrote his book about the Concert of Vienna and the Metternich in the wake of the Napoleonic Wars. And in the introduction to his PhD, he says, there are only two ways to create an international order: by will or by renunciation, by conquest or by legitimacy. The EU is not an order of conquest, but as of yet it is not an order of legitimacy either, or at least it's failing on that score, especially in its contact to the individual European citizen. And we've seen this become increasingly pronounced in many European countries, that the perpetual crisis that we have been witnessing in Europe has driven states away from each other, but we've also seen that the leaderships of various states have been driven away from their populations, and that unhappiness about the state of affairs in Europe has been, to some extent, translated into disenchantment with the European Union itself. The legacy of the euro crisis is the north-south divide in Europe. We were talking about the BRICS. Well, there is another acronym. Have you heard about the PIGS, or the new PIGS? Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain. The I used to be Ireland, but now is Italy. These are the countries that have not emerged from the euro crisis and that are still suffering from the outfalls of this crisis. This north-south divide has become a particular problem in Europe because, according to economists such as Thilo Sarrazin in Germany, we have created now an order that is contingent or dependent upon permanent large-scale transference of capital from the north to the south. The problem is that the south of Europe is more populous than the north of Europe, and that the supply of free capital is smaller than the need in the south. And this is creating a lot of resentment between the southern bloc and the northern bloc in the European Union. Currently, this dissatisfaction is focusing on the debate of austerity. And in some ways, it's true when the Greeks are accusing the North Europeans of trying to force them to become Germans. I think it is the goal of the North Europeans. We believe that states should keep their financial house in order. We believe that you should not run your state with deficits. We believe that your state should be run by an uncorruptible cadre of qualified bureaucrats and officials. We believe that this is the right way to run a state. But of course, what we fail to take into consideration is that every state in Europe is the product of its own unique historical experience. Greece is the result of a distinctly Greek historical experience. It's the reason why Greece functions like this. And in Southern Europe, rather than being fiscally conservative and to the North European mind responsible, many of the states have traditionally resolved social conflict through inflation. Because it's difficult to tax people, you just turn up inflation, you make your exports cheaper, and inflation is fair in the sense that everybody's money gets less worth. But with the euro, inflation is impossible. And this is why Matteo Renzi is seeking to get a deal where he will be allowed to run bigger budget deficits. And I think that this is a fight that the Italians might actually win, not least because of the next crisis I'm going to address shortly, and that is, of course, the migration crisis. But before saying that, another legacy of the financial crisis in Europe, and let's keep that in mind. The United States was back in positive growth 2 years after the crisis. 2008, they hit the crisis. 2010, they're back in positive growth. Europe is still flatlining after the crisis. We've been flatlining since 2008. I don't think the euro, and I think it would be a very far stretch to argue that the euro caused the euro crisis. But I think it would be very difficult to make a counter-argument to arguing that the euro has served to prolong the crisis in some ways. And of course, this might be the problem of a one-size-fits-all currency. Because as we all know, when buying one-size-fits-all clothes, one size does not fit all, it fits some. And the euro fits some states, it doesn't fit all. What has happened all over Europe is the euro crisis has also been accompanied by a rapid growth in economic inequality. And this is something that plays into the migration crisis as well. Branko Mihajlovic, who is the research director at the World Bank, I believe, wrote a book called The Haves and the Have-Nots. And one of the main conclusions there I find particularly interesting, and I think it might interest some of you as well, and that is who benefits from redistribution in a society. You know, we all have a society and we have a state that redistributes wealth. So who benefits from redistribution? Well, of course, if you take the population and divides it into 10 based on income, no surprise, the bottom 10th. They are the ones who benefit the most from the redistribution, as it should be. What is more interesting is who do not benefit from redistribution. Well, according to Branko Mihajlovic, it's the 5th and the 6th 10th, i.e. the middle class. They do not benefit from redistribution because it's mainly their money that's being redistributed. And in the context of the European financial crisis, we have seen an erosion of this middle class, and this has taken a political outfall. Towards the end of the 1990s, Europe was more or less a red continent. There were social democrats in power pretty much throughout Europe. Then, now in 2016, we see a much bluer Europe. And not only the old school liberal conservative centrist parties, we're seeing strong parties emerge to the right of the conservatives in actually most European countries. And this has something to do, I believe, with the erosion of the middle class and the problem of fighting inequality because, when the middle class is suffering, because these are the people that tend to get taxed when we're going to be redistributed. And as a result, we have an angry middle class and growing inequality, which is a problem in any state in the world. Adding to the troubles, we see a trend in the United States where the Americans are reindustrializing. They are reindustrializing the Midwest. The Rust Belt cities of the Midwest, you know, the Chicagos, the Flint, Michigans, the Detroits of the United States, smoke is coming out of the chimneys again. This is a result of willed policy on behalf of the policy establishment in the United States. They woke up to the fact that exporting all their industries to Asia was not such a brilliant idea. So how are we doing in Europe? Well, of course, as usually, the European Union woke up to this about 10 years, 15 years after the Americans. Now the European Union is banding around in 2015 a reindustrialization policy of Europe. The problem is, according to the Lisbon strategy of 2000, the EU was coming very close to having an active deindustrialization policy because we were going to become the greenest economy in the world. And so we actually encouraged a lot of the industry to go, and if we didn't encourage it, we were certainly applauding as they left. And now we see the problem of running economies without industries, because industries generate a lot of jobs in supporting sectors. And that is something that we're suffering in Europe, where we have gotten to a beggar thy neighbor economy, where various countries are pushing down the rate for taxation for business in the hope of attracting what remains of Europe's industries. And this race towards the bottom, of course, generates preciously little tax income that can be redistributed, and that is another of the challenges that we're seeing here in Europe. All this has translated into a general decline in support for European integration. And what is interesting is this support for further integration has been weak amongst the populations of Europe for quite a long time, if you read the Eurobarometer or Pew polls. But now we also see it in the nation states. I have it on good authority that the meetings in the EU are no longer as pleasant as they used to be. When 28 heads of states come together, it's a big, well, it's like a class party, like you people are here. Now it's not such a happy atmosphere. The national interest is something that's being bandied around much more than it used to be, and the tone between various states has grown much harder than it has been in the past. And that brings me to that other division. The first division in Europe, north-south, is primarily an economic one. East-west is largely an ideological division. Because as the EU was busy resolving the euro crisis, things were happening in the East. I doubt that the EU thought much about the potential consequences of offering an association agreement to Ukraine, what that might entail. They were certainly surprised by the Russian response. Of course, if the EU had done their homework, they would have known that EU expansion into Ukraine was unacceptable from the Russian perspective. And it is not as if the Russians had been hiding this perspective. Putin said it in plain words in Bucharest in 2008. He reiterated it in Valdai, and it's perhaps to be understood in some ways. Sinyu Brzezinski, the great foreign policy advisor to President Carter, put it in very starch terms. He says, without the Ukraine, the Russia is a middle power. With the Ukraine, it's a great power. And that's how important Ukraine is to Russia, at least from the view of Sinyu Brzezinski, who I believe is of Polish extraction and I think has perhaps a little bit more insight to the region than most Americans. Regardless of that, the EU offered an accession agreement, the Euromaidan took place, a tremendously complicated set of events unfolded. I doubt that we will ever know what actually happened and who actually supported what. It was a murky image. That, of course, continued when suddenly little green men started appearing in Crimea. Even some little green Serbian men, at least with Serbian flags, were appearing in Crimea. Russia violated, at least from a Western perspective, violated the deep peace in Europe. The deep peace from a Western perspective that it's not allowed to change the borders in Europe unless a new state is created. That is sort of the deal as we see it. Of course, Russia sees it in a very different way. They see Crimea as essentially a Russian part of the country, as was largely confirmed by the following referendum, and that this was a bureaucratic issue when Ukraine was signed over, Crimea was signed to the Ukraine in the 1950s. This crisis could have been ignored by the European Union had it not been for the armed insurgency in Donetsk and Luhansk, which brought the European Union back into contention. I'm not going to say whether the resolution, the Minsk Accords, whether they are going to stick. But again, it's interesting to see that here was a chance for the European Union to do something, and it again transpired that the European Union is Germany. It was Germany who negotiated in Minsk. They had the French along as chaperones, but again, it was the Germans who were providing the leadership for Europe. This debate or struggle of ideas between Russia, that is a resurgent Russia with its distinct blend of Russian nationalism and a view of its own, what Medvedev called a zone of privileged interest, its own sphere of influence, and the United States that has been pulling back from Europe, wanting the Europeans to take care of itself. Well, we saw that the European Union is not much of a match for Russia. Its decision-making procedures is not well suited for dealing with diplomacy of this type. And to make things worse, if only Russia had been in Russia, that would be fine. But we have a leader in Hungary, Viktor Orban, who is voicing much of the same agenda as you see in Russia, at least some of the same perspectives. And of course, viewed from the West, and I make an apology for incessantly saying viewed from the West, but I want to make this clear that my perspective is that of a Westerner. I'm not purporting to speak from a completely objective perspective. But viewed from the West, Viktor Orban was an oddity, a strange leader, akin to perhaps Jörg Haider of Austria, a leader that we should isolate and then forget about. But what has happened is that the Orbanites of Europe has spread. They have spread into Slovenia, Croatia, Slovakia, Czech Republic, and the big one, Poland. And suddenly you have a block of states that is challenging the German leadership. And there is currently going on an undeclared culture war between the national conservative Orbanites of Eastern Europe and the socially liberal Merkelians of Western Europe. And it's very interesting to see that over the past year or so, it's the Orbanites who have been winning. The Orbanites have been the ones that have been providing the solutions, and Germany has found it increasingly difficult to coax its European partners into action. And this has very much to do with this fact that France has grown very introverted and the British are looking for the exit. And in this Europe, the Germans find it difficult to get all its ducks in a row, to use an English phrase, or to create order amongst, or unity amongst the Europeans. Of course, the Orbanites were not helped much by the crisis in Ukraine. What really helped the Orbanites has been the migration crisis. The migration crisis has been one of the worst cases of public policy I have seen in my life. It is shockingly how bad it has been handled on behalf of Europe. And I have to say that much of the fault with this resides with Germany, again, for tearing up the Dublin agreements and allowing anybody to, or at least anybody who can credibly claim to be Syrian, to apply for asylum in Germany. This created a mass exodus out of the Middle East into Europe through Serbia that we are still seeing. Germany last year accepted 1.3 million asylum seekers. 1.3 million. Country like Norway, we accept tens of thousands. Same in Sweden, Denmark. This is not popular in many countries. And the countries that have said, we're not going to take part in this redistribution of the migrants, led by Viktor Orban, have been lent credibility by the events. Because when Chancellor Merkel says, wir schaffen das, we can handle this, it seems that she's not right about that. Many Germans are questioning whether, in fact, we can handle that. Europe, my friends, is facing a very great challenge. And that challenge is summarized by these 4 numbers. And if there's one thing that I hope that you will remember from my talk, it's these 4 numbers: 7, 25, 50, 80. Europe makes up 7% of the world's population. We make out roughly 25% of the world's economic output. We stand for 50% of all the welfare spending in the world. And we accept 80% of all the asylum seekers in the world. This is an imbalance that is going to become increasingly difficult to manage for European states, with new migrants that for the most part are low-skilled, undereducated people who need a lot of investments to be turned into productive workers, at the same time as the welfare states are growing increasingly unaffordable because of the baby boom generations and the fact that we haven't been saving up money for the baby boomers to grow old. And at the same time, I think it's beyond doubt that Europe's very liberal asylum policies has been a beacon, a light that has been guiding asylum seekers towards Europe. And there is nothing to indicate that this crisis is over. I am not amongst those who think that the dirty deal that the Germans did with the Turks, that is going to hold. Every experience so far about the migration crisis is that migrants are like water. When you put up a fence one place, they just go around it. And I think that unfortunately, for Europe is where it's going to head. Why do I say unfortunately? Well, because any idiot can understand that large-scale migration into a region of economic crisis is a bad idea. You will have pretty perverse political outcomes if you pursue that kind of policies. Some of you might be interested in history, and this is very much what happened in the decline of liberalism in Belle Époque, Austria, the Habsburg Empire in the late 1880s, 1890s, especially in Hungary and in Vienna, where you have economic crisis, large-scale migration, and the atmosphere creates a lot of unsavory political characters. And unfortunately, I don't think we have seen. I don't think that Urban is the worst that we will see. I think Viktor Orban is quite a normal European politician. Definitely somebody who deserves to sit at the table and whose opinions should be taken into account. But of course, there are other political forces at play in Europe, and I'm here talking about Golden Dawn in Greece, Jobbik, that kind of actors that seems to be growing stronger in the face of a financial crisis that is gutting the middle classes, and with a migration crisis that seems to be without end. I have learned from traveling around in the world that international politics is all well and good, but pretty much everybody are most interested in their own country. So I thought I'd round off with a couple of very small remarks about the plight of Serbia in this situation. Winston Churchill once said that the Balkans produce more history than you are able to consume. And I think that is very much the case of Serbia. After the wars of the 1990s, Serbia has had to reinvent itself in a sense. It's a country that has grown accustomed to having influence far beyond its core regions, and now has to find itself again as a small state. And take it from me, coming from a small state, Norway with 5 million people, it's not such a bad thing to be a small state. And if I were to be so bold as to advise you, my Serbian friends, on this, I would say embrace it. Embrace being a small state. It is quite a nice place to be, where you don't have to care so much about the going-ons in the world, because it is for bigger players than you to resolve. You can focus more on your own state, and Serbia is actually quite favorably, some would say perilously, situated at the crossroads between the key actors, between Germany, Turkey, and Russia. And I think that this role is something that is going to loom quite large in the future of Serbia. And of course, I know it's always difficult. When I discuss this with my Serbian friends, it's always difficult to get people to think outside of the historical box. And I know that most Serbians have a historical tie towards Russia. I would say that the smartest thing Serbia could do is to buckle down and join NATO and join the EU. I think that is the best way forward. I don't think that Russia could ever deliver the kind of goods that the United States can. And of course, I realize how controversial that is here in this audience. I also think that Serbia has a great possibility when it comes to education. With a largely educated population, you have the chance of turning, and especially by using the 3 million strong Serbian diaspora abroad, turning your young people into the drivers of the economy. This is something that would set you apart from most other countries in the region, and something that I believe would make Serbia a preferred partner for the EU in the region. But of course, the EU membership would have to happen first. And for small states, such as Norway, such as Serbia, the best way ahead is usually to embrace a free trade, export-driven economy. That's usually what delivers the greatest wealth, and that is also the core of why I would make a case for NATO and for the EU, because if you look at it with a cool head, you see that Serbia is a little bit too far away from Russia. to be able to be integrated into the Russian economy the way that Serbia could be integrated into the European economies, not least forming a bridge between the Greeks and the rest of the Union. So, dear friends, we have now visited a kind of bleak picture of a world in disorder and a return of geopolitics to Europe. I hasten to say that it is not by no means certain that the prevailing trends are going to continue. I must remind you that historically the biggest leaps in European integration has happened as a result of crisis, and that might happen again. But there is also a chance that we see that the forces of chaos will be eating away at the roots of the European Union, slowly fragmenting this cooperation, slowly gnawing away at the roots of the internationalized international order, and making the world in many ways a much more dangerous place for us all. On that note, I would like to end and open for questions and answers. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you very much for this introduction of the geopolitics in Europe. I realize that you have many friends here and that you are historian by education and that you are very aware, you should be then aware of our history and the history of wars on the territory of Serbia or wars in which Serbian nation was involved. Including to remind everybody that today is the anniversary of the NATO bombing, which killed a huge number of people, citizens of Serbia, kids. And yet you are proposing that joining to NATO is the best option. It is, even though we are listening to different political statements from Europe and elsewhere on the different prospects of joining to NATO. My opinion, personally, I will say it, is that NATO is recommended to secure investments of the European Union and the others in the region, because businesses are moving to the region where raw materials, labor force is cheaper, and NATO is giving a sort of protection to this market enlargement. Everything is about the business. Nothing is about the politics. If you can comment on that and to make me believe that it's worth thinking about joining the NATO.
Well, I must stress again that I do understand that this question has a huge emotional component to Serbs, and I by no means want to offend you on this score. This is merely a result of a discussion that I had with our glorious leader here in the car. What should Serbia do? And for Serbia, I think, as a small state, the main priority is to retain the country strong and united, and to make sure that 200 years from now, Serbia still exists. In the current order, where we're seeing increased forces of chaos, I think it can be profoundly dangerous to stand alone, to go for some sort of armed neutrality. I don't think that Serbia would be able to withstand pressure if if it was exerted upon them. And as you saw during the Kosovo War and the Balkan War, the Bosnian Wars, took an amazingly short time from shots were fired until the Serbs were portrayed as the new Nazis in Western media. And of course, this was grossly unfair, but I'm not saying that the world is a fair place. The world is not a fair place, and that is why I think we have to be very, especially us citizens of small states, we have to be particularly unemotional about the choices that we make when it comes to our affiliations in the world. And I think an alliance with the most powerful state in the world, which is also a very cheap alliance, is preferable to close ties to Russia, an actor that is unpredictable in many ways, an actor that would not inform Serbia ahead of their own actions, but they would expect Serbia to support them, and an actor that also might well end up coming into conflict with other states. I think on that balance, not to mention the fact that were Serbia to join NATO, it would join into a security fraternity of NATO states in the region that would form what Karl Deutsch called a security complex of sorts, which would take care of security for Serbia, hopefully in the long run. That said, I do understand that the processes by which a state chooses its friends and its enemies in this world is one of the most intimate processes in the internal life of any state. And I also know that this is one of the processes where foreign input will do the most harm and the least good. And of course, this will have to be a process that is decided by Serbs and by Serb politicians. That said, I think it's easy to fall into the trap that the Ukrainians did, where they thought that they were in a really privileged position because they could play a two-level game, where they could play the Russians out against the Europeans, and so they could say, tell the Russians we might join the Eurasian Union if we can get this, and they tell the Europeans that we might sign off on this if we can get this, and then just get the best deal. And look at where Ukraine is in now. It's dangerous for small states to be playing that sort of games. And traditionally, I would say that if an alliance is on the books or is on offer, and the Americans are feeling bad about the wars, they really are. So they would actually be. I believe that NATO would be willing to offer membership to NATO, not least with Jens Stoltenberg, the current Secretary General of NATO, who grew up in Beograd. So that's a possibility, but of course, it's a possibility that can only be seized if the Serbian people believes that this is the path that should be taken. That would be the Western path for Serbia. And of course, again, caveat emptor, I'm a Westerner. I believe that this is the best path to be taken. Of course, there are other paths. Of course, Turkey could navigate this. You could navigate yourself closer to Turkey. Turkish influence is growing in the Balkans. It's something that you will have to deal with, and I believe that is a relationship that is perhaps even more distasteful to Serbs than even NATO. And then, of course, we have the Russians. But I think Serbia will find out the same way that every small state has ever found out in the history of small states, that we join into. We believe that the connection with the great power is one of love, of true love, of mutual respect. And then we find out that great powers are not arrogant because they dislike other countries or anything. They are arrogant because they are great powers. It comes with the territory. And they don't respect small states. They tend to take small states for granted. And of course, with a lot of effort, Serbia could become sort of the Israel for the Russians, but I don't think it would go that far. It's a wonderful historical link, and one that, by all means, Serbia should maintain. But when it comes to trade and security, I'm not sure if it's the best bet.
Sorry, one sub-question.
Sure, sure.
There is no doubt that Serbia is moving towards the full membership of the European Union, even though it is very difficult and hard under these circumstances to achieve all the goals. But since we are talking about European Union and geopolitics in European Union, and still mentioning NATO organization led by the force that is on the other continent, and having in mind that in many European countries there is a more and more discussion about European armed forces, joint forces of the European nations. Do you think that in case that European army forces are formed, we still need NATO?
Well, that's wonderful. This is actually the theme of my PhD, and no, it's not going to happen. There is not going to be a European army. There is going to be, of course, we could have a European army if we gave guns to all the academicians who wrote about European defense integration. Then we would have quite a sizable army. But basically, it's not happening. You know, it's a political, it's a bureaucratic, diplomatic creature. European security and defense policy. It is not a military strategic instrument. And as you probably will see now with the EU border guards, you know, the much wanted, they have agreed that the Frontex is going to get EU border guards. But if past experience is anything to go by, there is nothing to indicate that the EU will give this force sufficient funds or the right leadership or the correct resources. Every single time the EU has attempted crisis management, they have failed, either all three or one of the three. And the EU is not really an organization that is well suited to the use of force. And that's the wonderful thing about the Americans. They have managed to keep NATO together for 50 years. My boss at the Nobel Institute, he coined this wonderful phrase, empire by invitation. And I think it's still very true, at least when it comes to security in Europe. Yes, the United States is in many ways an imperial power. Let's be honest about it. But it's also by invitation. Because let's keep in mind, and Serbia and Norway, we know this equally to be true, that Europe has been an incredibly war-prone continent. We have been in the business of war for centuries. And cyclical war grew to the point where we 2 times in a 20-year, 30-year period threw the entire world into world wars. And Europe is sick of war. And I think this is something that still stands pretty strongly in most European countries. We don't want more wars. And the Americans have acted as a pacifier in that sense, keeping historical grudges from going on the boil. And I think it's almost a miracle that they have managed to prevent Greece and Turkey from fighting each other even once. Because having friends in the Greek military, I don't think that the Greeks would have been too opposed to fighting the Turks every now and then. But they have avoided that, and now the relations between Greece and Turkey are actually quite good, which I think, you know, in a strong contest, the relations between Greece and Turkey must be some of the worst by any states in the region. And now they have a workable relationship. And it's much due to the Americans, to the tireless diplomacy of the Americans. And the American power is not the way that it's often portrayed in anti-American media, that the Americans are telling their allies to jump, and we say, oh, how high. It's a much closer and much more friendly relationship, but it's the relationship between small and medium-sized states and the most powerful country on earth. Of course, the challenge now is not the European army. The challenge is the American election campaign now. Now we have 2 candidates, 2 front runners. Donald Tusk, sorry, not Donald Tusk. Donald Trump. Donald Tusk is nice. He's a good guy. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton is a liberal hawk whose foreign policy credentials can be questioned. Let's leave it at that. She has questionable instincts when it comes to use of military force. And Donald Trump seems to be more an old school American isolationist. If the Americans pull out of Europe, we will have a problem. And for all the people who dislike America, I think that we are all going to dislike a world without, or Europe without America, much more than a Europe with America. And that's where it stands, because I don't think Europe will get its act together and create a European army. On the contrary, I think, and this is my personal view, in the current process that the European Union is stuck, the clever money is that some parts of the European integration project is going to shake loose from the Union. Some of the integration projects are going to fall to the waysides. And amongst those, or at least high on the list, I believe the common foreign policy and the security policy is going to be on the list of those initiatives that's going to become voluntary, that some states will join them and have their discussions, and many states will just not be there and put their very limited military resources into NATO. Any other questions?
Thank you for this overview. I wanted to ask you about your personal view about the sustainability of the European Union in the middle run.
That's a great question. The sustainability of the European Union is currently much contingent on what happens in Berlin. Currently, the French economy hasn't been performing for a long time, and they have the challenge of Front National that's going to be a real contender for the presidency in 2017. At the same time, the Brexit referendum in Britain is not a foregone conclusion. The British might actually leave the Union. And if the British leave in June, it will spark a lot of soul-searching, belated soul-searching in the EU into why the Union is not seen as attractive anymore. The European Union was built in the mold of dedicated integrationists like Altiero Spinelli, the Italian communist. The dream that a committed cadre of internationalists through bureaucratic integration would distill a European antidote to the European disease. And to Altiero Spinelli's view, the disease of Europe was sovereignty. European states were too sovereign, and that was the reason why we kept on clashing all the time. So through economic integration, we would make the states less sovereign, but the continent more peaceful. The problem is that this integration process has by far outpaced public opinion. Figures are pretty stable on this, that the big leaps in European integration has not been all that popular amongst the peoples of Europe. And especially in the last 20 years or so, since the end of the Cold War, the European Union has moved decisively from the economic sphere into the political sphere. And this has not been an altogether happy development for the European Union. And we now see that as long as the European Union was governed by an axis between Paris and Bonn, Paris and Berlin, it worked somehow, that you had the critical mass of a Germany with 50, later 80 million people, and with France, with its roughly 50 million people, you had the critical mass to drive integration forwards. Now it's fallen more and more up to the Germans to take this. And you see, with the declining popularity of Angela Merkel in Germany, it's going to be very interesting to see if Germany manages to stay in this role as the sort of the big brother of Europe, the one that is always stepping in with extra money or with diplomatic resources to stamp out all the little fires that is happening all the time. Because you see, with the rallying around Viktor Orban of especially Poland, you see a force is rising in the east that is challenging the intellectual hegemony, the German intellectual hegemony in Europe. And in Norwegian history, and of course you're all interested in Norwegian history, as you all know, Norway is a monarchy, and The wisest thing that was ever said in Norwegian politics was said by the Norwegian king, King Haakon VII. The first time the communists were attempted to form government in Norway, you know, the conservatives ran to the king and said, "You can't confirm this government. They're communists. They're opposed to the monarchy." And the king looked coldly on the representative and says, "I am also the king of the communists." The European Union has so far chosen not to be the union of the so-called populists, the Orbanites. And this has been a very bad idea. Pitching the European Union, especially the European Parliament, as the enemy of the national conservative camp that is emerging in Eastern Europe has created a tension that makes these countries less willing to be constructive partners within the European frameworks. And I think that is the one tension, the one line of contention that might actually prove the undoing of some of the European Union. I am not amongst those who believe that we will lose all of the European Union. If the European Union disappeared today, we would have to reinvent a lot of it tomorrow, because much of what the European Union is about facilitating trade, and that is something that we all do. But some parts of the more ambitious political aspects of the European Union were carried out without legitimacy, without what the Kissinger quote that I mentioned previously. And this lack of legitimacy has now become an urgent problem for Europe. And I believe that we will see huge amounts of turbulence. We will see continued crisis summits in the European Union, and it's not given that all of the European Union will survive this period of turmoil intact.
During today's expo, you talked about the forces of chaos and forces of stability. How do you see the U.S.?
Wow. The great thing about being the power in a unipolar system is that you can make everybody to play by the rules, but you don't have to observe them yourself, because you are the system determining power. You are the power that creates the system. So the United States has gotten used to being in a position where they demand that other states cooperate, and they themselves take a step back and follow their national interest. I think, as I mentioned, the Iraq War was in many ways a watershed on this score. It was a particularly badly thought out policy on behalf of the Americans. There's a story, and I believe I have it from French sources, that Jacques Chirac, French president, met President George Bush the younger in New York in the UN, and he took him to the side and he says, okay, before this all happened, during the votes in the UN Security Council, and the French president says, listen, we French, we have experience in fighting nationalist insurgencies in the Arab world. We got our asses kicked in Algeria, and it was not because we didn't win militarily. You're going to get yourself into something that you can't get yourself out of. For the love of God and for your own sake, don't do this. President Bush apparently responds, I've listened very carefully to what you have to say, and I disagree. I don't think so many people disagree now. And as long as we had American leaders who were willing to provide leadership, and also American leaders who were willing to spend American blood and American money to uphold the international system, to actually get the boys on board the ships and actually invade a country like Kuwait, when Saddam Hussein broke the international order and invaded and attempted to annex a neighboring country, the Americans stepped up and stop them from doing that. We need states who are willing to police the international system. But it does seem that in recent times, American willingness to do this sort of, for the lack of a better word, janitorial tasks of the international system, it seems the Americans' willingness to do this has been diminished, and it's been on display in Syria, where American policies have been haphazard and where Russian diplomacy has been running circles around the Americans, pushing them into a corner where the Americans have ended up and I believe they will end up supporting the Assad side, because in the fight between Assad and the IS, well, I think most reasonable people would choose the lesser evil, and the lesser evil would have to be Assad. And it's a horrible choice, because Assad is such a vile character, a man who slaughtered his own people, but held up to the IS, which is a low point in civilization. And that's also, if you take the sheer amount of history into account, this is where we're standing. And when I hear what is coming out of the foreign policy addresses from the two leading candidates, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, I'm a little bit worried about what sort of America we're going to see after this election. It seems to be an America that is increasingly inward-looking, and an America that, when it focuses on something, is focusing on East Asia, not our backyard. What?
Amen.
Thank you.
God willingly that happens. But you didn't really answer my question. What force do you see the US, you personally, to be? The force of stability or force of chaos? Because one could easily argue, if you go back to 1995, bombing campaign of Bosnia, 1999 basically is the beginning or the end of the old world as we know it, because chaos sets in. With the bombing of Serbia, the world chaos sets in. And from there on, it goes to Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria. Should I move on? How do you see the US?
It's a point well made, and this is a point that that Vladimir Putin makes every time he gets the chance, that it was the Americans who broke the order, not anybody else. But I think on balance, we have to take into consideration that the United States is a force for stability in the world, because the international order today is policed and controlled to some extent, at least supported by the United States. We're talking about the entire edifice of the international order, from the UN to the World Bank to the IMF, etc., etc. So the Americans are still the indispensable nation, the state that can mold the great multinational compromises over climate change, over security, over economy. What I'm saying is that America seems to be ever more reluctant to play this role, and this plays into the quotes that I was giving earlier, that we see a world that has allowed challengers to rise. And how often do you see Chinese soldiers wearing the blue helmet of the United Nations, or the Russians? The challenging states, they feel that the international order is not really beneficial to them. It's skewed in a way to benefit the Americans, and this creates a great problem for all us small states in the international system, because Serbia and my native country Norway, we can't determine the international system. We will have to live in the world that others create for us, and that makes it a very perilous place. It's also difficult to be a small state, because we have to think very, very seriously about our commitments, because of course a system that collapses is much more dangerous for small states than it is for great powers, as the great number of states in history that no longer exists attest to.
Unless 70% of your business is oil and gas.
Okay, since I'm the last one, thank you for your great and enlightening lecture. And I think that it's great lecture because you clearly state your framework and your point of view, and you stay close to it, and you don't try to meddle with other frameworks. And that is a great thing. I have a question. It's paradoxical that the ruling force of the world order, which is USA, is the first force to break its own order, and it's kind of paradox, and that started the crisis. And later we discussed the crisis in Europe, and we see that with taking a mutual currency, and that is euro, you are trying to perform a surgery with only one hand. You have the fiscal policy, but you don't have the monetary policy, and then later on you don't have the fiscal policy maybe, and that's the thing. But my question is it possible to make Europe of sovereign, union of sovereign European nations instead of current vision of European Union, and maybe we that way provide a way of political legitimacy for the European Union?
It's a great question, and I think yes,
Thank you.
Yes, it is possible. This is the vision of Charles de Gaulle. He dreamed of not of a United States of Europe, where the nation states take the role of the states in the American Federation, where I guess Norway would be maybe Florida and you guys would be West Virginia or something like that. This was not the vision of Charles de Gaulle, and it's not the vision of most Europeans. Most Europeans are very, very committed to their nation states. We love our nation states. It's something that is intrinsic and important to us. It's not something that is seen as a problem to be overcome. This is also, I believe, and at least when I saw Viktor Orbán speak to Globsec, the security conference in Bratislava last year, this was very much the view that he put forth, the view for a European Union made up by sovereign nation states. Of course, that creates its own problem, and that is when you get a union with 28, 30, 35 states, you all have one vote. It doesn't take a genius to understand that it's very, very difficult to get consensus about policies, because it will always be somebody who says, no, we don't like this, we don't like that. And therefore, the European Union has, with the Treaty of Lisbon, brought in this new mechanism. In the shorthand, the EU, they love their acronyms, you know, and so the shorthand is QMV, Qualified Majority Voting. And it's a very complicated formula where you can make big decisions by majority. And we saw the problem with this over the migration crisis, where they tried to distribute migrants, 160,000 migrants amongst the EU states after a very complicated key. And the Slovakians said no. They were voted down, and they still refuse to take the migrants that were allotted to them. And this is the problem of a Europe of nation states. It will be very, very difficult to govern. In some ways, it would be beneficial to Europe if we had a hegemon, that Germany could play that role that the United States has played in NATO, the big beast that makes that takes the strategic decisions on behalf of the European Union. But of course, the Germans are very reluctant to play that role. Germany is a strange country, my friend. It's a country that has 80 million people, by far the biggest economy in Europe, and still has a perception of itself as Switzerland. And that's something that is curious to all countries that deal with the Germans, and it's something that will have to be resolved in Germany. And frankly, there is very little sign in Germany that there is a serious discussion going on about the role that Germany has been taking in the European Union. And as a result, you see growing animosity in many European states, not least in Greece, towards Germany. They feel that German leadership is illegitimate, that the Germans are making them do things that they don't want to do, that the Germans are exerting economic pressure on them that is unfair, and that this is not the union that they wanted to join. They didn't think they were joining the European Union where they would be effectively put under administration and where they're being forced to carry out policies that are deeply unpopular within the populations of Greece. And this is something that you will see signs of in countries such as Italy. You will see it to a lesser degree in Spain. You will find it in the corridors of powers in France and in many other countries. And it seems that a European crisis is becoming a much less harmonious place than the European Union of the glory days of European integration in the late 1990s and the first years of the aughts. That's it for now. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Asol. It was not easy to listen to that perspective. And I imagine that's the way why everybody is feeling a little bit down.
I'm sorry about that, guys.
Now it's time for coffee, and Asel is going to stay with us today and tomorrow, and I'm sure he's going to provide other great insights about how the things are. And this perspective from Norway, it's very interesting and valuable. Pola sata pauza. Evo kako odmiče posle podne, tako se polako unosi sve više i više stolica i to jeste ideja da ko zakasni se pita gde će da sedne, a ako dođe na vreme dobije mesto. Pa nastavljamo sa temom koja se odnosi na preduzetništvo. Svi vi koji ste na Twitteru, Facebooku i ostalim društvenim mrežama tweetujte, svi ovi koji nas gledaju preko live streama, a vidim da je bilo u ovom prvom prenosu nekoliko desetina ljudi koji su se uključivali i gledali već prenos programa, i ova će se isto sesija prenositi uživo preko YouTube kanala, a mi pričamo o ogromnoj temi o kojoj u stvari malo znamo, a to je tema preduzetništva i preduzetničke inicijative, pitanja da li je onaj ko se odvaži da se bavi preduzetništvom u stvari neki mučenik koji nije imao drugu vrstu izbora i san svakoga bi bio da u stvari radi negde gde može da se dobro zaradi bez velike odgovornosti, ili to sad postaje glavni motor razvoja koji ima naša privreda. Pa mi smo napravili jedan veoma zanimljiv miks danas o tome, a ja ću da predstavim našeg uvodničara i moderatora, on će dalje da preuzme palicu, da predstavi ostale goste. Ja sam imao priliku da Daniela Boehija upoznam pre, ja mislim, 5 ili 6 godina. On spada u onu vrstu ljudi koji su neka vrsta privrednog Archibalda Rajsa. Šteta što poslovna zajednica nije njega, dok je bio u korporativnim položajima, nije ga više uključivala i slušala. Daniel je bio izvršni direktor kompanija Bambi, Knjaz Miloš i Imlek. Pre toga je proveo sigurno 10 godina radeći za Nestle, koji je jedna od najuglednijih globalnih kompanija robe široke potrošnje na različitim kontinentima i različitim zemljama, od Gruzije do Meksika i zapadne i centralne Evrope. On je inače završio fakultet. Kao što vidite, mi volimo da pričamo o biografijama i u svakom od ovih programa koje imamo, obavezna stvar je da se vidi biografija govornika i učesnika, upravo zato da bi podstakli razliku da biografija i radna karijera nije bez značaja. Tako je i Daniel završio ekonomski fakultet u Cirihu, tamo je magistrirao i doktorirao poslovnu strategiju i poslovni razvoj, znači ima doktorat, što je danas veoma popularno u domenu naših političkih elita, i u tom smislu ima i tu formalnu kvalifikaciju, pored toga što je 20 i nešto godina radeći u najrigoroznijim sistemima i organizacijama. Daniel je dugo godina u Srbiji, veoma je strastven oko toga kako bi ekonomija i okruženje Srbije moglo da bude bolje, što je u stvari moguće samo da rade Švajcarci ili Norvežani ili oni ljudi koji su iz potpuno druge krajnosti dolaze u odnosu na nas i raduju se našoj iracionalnosti. Daniel je pre nekoliko meseci doveo u Srbiju Founders Institute. To je organizacija koja je najveća mreža za razvoj preduzetničke inicijative iz Kalifornije, najrazgranatija u svetu u pogledu pomoći ljudima da započnu svoje biznise, poslovnih anđela i razvoja poslovanja, i posvetio se razvoju preduzetništva kod nas. I evo, ja predajem palicu Danielu. Daniel, thank you for coming and organizing this panel, and I let you organize and introduce your guests. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. Welcome. Thank you for the introduction, Surgeon. Let me start with a question to the panel. Who of you is an entrepreneur? So you see, a very small minority of 10-15%. Entrepreneurship is everywhere. Everyone is talking about it. I think it's even the entrepreneurship is the year of entrepreneurship in Serbia now. And there is a reason for that. There is a reason for that, because when you look at the last 15, 20 years, and you look around globally, you'll see that 60% of all new jobs created around the globe are all coming from startup companies. And around 30% of GDP growth can be explained through startup companies, what they do, and how they develop. So startup companies, entrepreneurship, founders is a real economic power. Now, of course, it's not happening everywhere. And in some countries, it's happening more. We all know for Silicon Valley, we know for Israel, we know for Switzerland, we know for Berlin, and these kind of areas where really there is a lot of things happening. So I would like to kind of cover 3 topics today, and when you walk around and walk away after in an hour and a half, to have a little bit an idea of 3 things that we will be discussing as panelists. The first one would be, what does it take to be an entrepreneur? Is just, you know, having lost a job and then opening a kafana, is that enough to be an entrepreneur? Yes or no? Maybe, maybe not. Let's see what the panelists have to say. The second question is, what exactly is a successful entrepreneur ecosystem? Of what does it consist? An ecosystem. I mean, how do you make startups grow, develop? And the third one is, how does this ecosystem in Serbia differ from UK, Switzerland, Israel, US? Can we replicate what we're doing in San Francisco, in Belgrade, or not? So these 3 questions, and for that, I have 3 distinguished guests that will help me answer these questions, and you, of course, will have the chance as well to participate. But first, we will go for a round. And I have Rade, and please apologize my Serbian, so Rade Ljubojević, right? He's the, it will be easier for me to introduce him in German because he lived the long years in Germany. He's the founder and owner of Zirogonje company, which produces knitting, famous knitting wares. And he is in business for many, many years. You will explain a little bit later on. We have afterwards Miljove Čalja, who is I'm sorry for Mile. Can I say Mile? Mile. Mile Čalja, that's easier. Who, for some of you, I mean, me being in Bambi knows that, of course, Angeli Biscuits, he founded them, but that was just to prove that entrepreneurship works, because he has, besides that, a large and big company in the area of printing and advertising. And then we have Bogdan Đurić, who is a managing partner of Crown Harvard in Serbia, who is as well a company, I mean, it's worldwide actually, or it's actually worldwide, really dealing with entrepreneurship and consulting and this kind of things. So before we come to the topic, I wanted to, Rade, ask you a little bit just to start. I mean, how did you come into, what is your personal life story? How did you come into entrepreneurship? How did you end up with this company that you have? Was it a coincidence, or were you always trying to get into entrepreneurship? Can you a little bit give your insights there?
Dobar dan svima, ja sam Rade Ljubojević, vlasnik Zirogonje company, kao što je gospodin predstavio. Dosta dugo sam u poslu i dosta godina imam, radio sam i u onom vremenu socijalističke Jugoslavije i naravno kad je sve to nestalo, kad je sve to propalo, onda smo krenuli u privatni biznis. Moram da kažem na početku da se moje angažovanje i moj rad i u privatnom biznisu ne razlikuje mnogo od posla koji je bio i u društvenoj firmi. Dakle, ja sam i tada radio, donosio neke inovativne stvari u firmu, donosio nove programe i to sam uradio i u privatnoj firmi. Dakle, nema velike razlike. Dosta dugo počeo sam u Sirogojnu, u firmi koja je proizvodila džempere, neke davne 70. godine. Bio sam komercijalni direktor, bio sam generalni direktor, onda sam prešao u Jugoeksport Beograd za direktora Užicu, za direktora predstavništva, onda sam otišao u Jugoeksport Frankfurt za njihovog direktora firme u Frankfurtu. Naravno, dolaskom sankcija i padom Berlinskog zida shvatio sam da društvenog posla više nema. Ako hoćete da radite u društvenim firmama, od toga više nema ništa. I onda sam shvatio da je privatni biznis i da je preduzetništvo, praktično privatni biznis, nešto što je moja dalja perspektiva. I okrenuo sam se tome i evo danas sam vlasnik kompanije koja zapošljava 180 ljudi, koja pravi 20 miliona prometa, 20 miliona eura prometa, od toga 95% izvozi na tržište 37 zemalja sveta. Radimo i te džempere i dalje, koje sam počeo 70. godina, ja sam to kupio u Sirogojnu, a od toga onda napravio dalje firmu koja ima neka svoja 3 segmenta, dakle džempere, sušeno voće i zamrznuto voće. Lideri smo u izvozu zamrznutog voća, lideri u preradi voća. Jedna smo od najopremljenijih fabrika za preradu voća u Evropi i kažem izvozimo u 37 zemalja na najprobirljivija tržišta, najveći smo izvoznik za Japan iz Srbije. Izvozimo za Indiju voće, izvozimo za Australiju, za Švedsku, Norvešku, Finsku, Englesku. Naši kupci su svi veliki lanci supermarketa u svetu.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Mile, very briefly, I mean, you have 3 kids, right? Yes. If I'm wrong. I mean, would you advise any of your kids today to become an entrepreneur in Serbia?
Absolutely. Why is that? Should this continue in English, right?
In English, I think that's
okay.
more.
My name is Milivoj Čalija. I'm co-owner of a family-owned company with my wife, which is called Čalija and Čalija. We created from scratch a brand called Anjeli, which is a brand for oatmeal cookies. We are producing our oatmeal cookies in 10 different flavors, and we exist for 3.5 years. And we entered 6 nationally covered chains in terms of distribution. Our background is in media and advertising. My wife and I have accumulated 30 years of experience in media and advertising, and one of the reasons why we decided to explore the possibility of entrepreneurship is the fact that we have the feeling that people from advertising and media, in most of the cases, are creating some sort of service or suggesting platform for persons who do have some sort of business. And we wanted to see, are we capable to create our business from its core, from its substance, not from the opportunistic perspective to suggest someone how to generate its business in better way, but to create our business absolutely from zero. According to our results, it seems that we succeeded in that, and our brand is developing in exactly precise pace like we planned, because we are trying to balance our work and life aspect in that sense, because as Daniel mentioned, we have 3 small kids and we don't want to burn ourselves out from the work. So our pace is very controlled because we want to grow as we like to.
But why do you think why would you suggest your kids to kind of go through this? Why do you think that Serbia is the place for your 3 kids to become entrepreneur, or is it not?
Well, it's not a place. I mean, to be honest, it's not a place for that sort of behavior, of course, because most of the people here are very opportunistic and they have some sort of expectation that society owes to take care of their destinies and their lives. As a family, we don't believe that sort of principle, and we will teach our kids to get a hold of their destiny and their life in an early stage, because this is the only way how we can support the idea that this community or this society should be and will become more sustainable in the future.
Okay. Bogdan, I mean, you're among the three gentlemen, the one that is in a more stable company, international corporation. If you tomorrow were to decide, okay, now I become an entrepreneur, and you have Larry Page, the CEO and founder of Google, on your side, great thing to have. I mean, in which industry would you go in Serbia? What do you think would be interesting in Serbia to go after? Where would you focus in terms of entrepreneurship in Serbia?
Okay, Daniel, before I answer your question, I just need to explain fully what is my position. So, though we are the part of the brand which is worldwide, which is present in almost all countries all over the world, we are entrepreneurs. Ownership of our company is within the local partners. So there is no entry of foreign shareholders or anything else. And if we are speaking about our presence, we are here on the market for 5 years. And in management theory, we are right now currently in entrepreneurship phase. So we are fighting, etc. So just a little bit from the background. I used to work for one big system, and then I started my own company, and then I joined, let's say, this worldwide brand. So we are paying for the name, let's say it like this. So from one side, I'm as well in the entrepreneurship position, but on the other side, we have a lot of dealings with the company and with the clients that are basically entrepreneurs in Serbia. So what to say about your question? I don't know what to say. There is no right answer currently in Serbia. I think that the right answer, or based on my experience and where the focus is right now in Serbia, is some kind of IT sector. We have a lot of talented people. We have currently, let's say, full employment of IT people, but as we are seeing on the world market, IT is something which is generating majority of income, some kind of cloud solutions, some kind of web-based solution. We are speaking about, all over protest of taxes because of the, what is the name of this application. So this is the things I think that we can use because we have sufficient knowledge and sufficiently qualified people here in Serbia that could go in this direction. Of course, the other topic, and which is, I think, some of my friends would fully support me, is agriculture. This is something which is really, compare Netherlands to Serbia. It's a smaller country. They don't have enough space, but they're producing, let's say, 50 times more of agricultural products than than Serbia. So I think that those two things would be like a priority if somebody come and ask me where they should invest.
Okay. I mean, I believe there's a third one maybe that Serbia is kind of maybe would have something interesting to offer, which is life science. Everything that is around biotech and these kind of things. There are a lot of very talented scientist people. I mean, there's a lot of talented IT people. There's a lot of agriculture around. So when you're saying that, I mean, there is a lot of these kind of things around, and yet when you look at what is happening, things are not developing. So that would lead me to a question where I'm just hypothesizing, and I'm saying, is there really an entrepreneurship DNA in this country? Are there really people? Is there a deep inside in the society, in every one of the people living here, a kind of an entrepreneurship DNA? And if it's not existing, what do you think is required to do? Maybe we start with you, Bogdan, to elaborate a little bit. What is required to get an entrepreneurship DNA? So everyone kind of really goes into this direction. I'm just giving an example of Israel. Israel is a startup country. I mean, the entire country is a startup, 40 years old, and they are briefing startup all the time. And there are a lot of things related to startup. Startup is something where people listen, where people learn, where people pivot, where people have a very different mentality of approaching issues, problems, challenges. And I'm observing that in Serbia this does not exist. So my question is, what is required? Maybe you don't share my view, but if you share, what do you think is required to get this DNA?
Yeah, I fully share your view. I must say, just, you know, because our business is made from the people. So we are using young people, and we need the people who are talented, who are bright, and who should have intellectual curiosity, you know. So my experience that when we have kind of selection process, 2 from 10 are in this kind of model. So I must say that in Serbia there is no really entrepreneurial DNA. I think that partly this is a consequence of the previous 50 years of way of living, you know. It was kind of mixture of socialism and communism, so everybody was happy working 6-7 hours, running from the job. They have the secured position. And I think that we are still, there are still remainings of this behavior, you know. The one important thing which I observe is that, let's say, young people who are coming from the families where their mother and father used to work for the government or something like that, are more prone to go in this direction, you know. We have a situation that they are basically expecting to get and work. If somebody worked for a tax authority, his father, he will continue to go there, you know. And there is even an advice from the parents to go in this direction. So, you know, go there, it's a safe place. You have a safe salary, though it is 300 euros till the end of the life. And, you know, just do nothing. So I think this is one of the problems.
But let me push you a little bit more. I mean, not just that we stick in kind of a good analysis and understanding. I mean, now we're here, and if you were to give an advice to people who have the power to change things, what would be the 1 or 2 things that you would say, this and this we have to do in order to get this entrepreneurial DNA back? What would your point be specifically?
First and most important thing, as one of our colleagues mentioned, is maybe this is a long-term change, but the first thing is that we need to change education.
How?
We need to switch from repetitive, you know, you have book of 1,000 pages, you need to memorize and you need to reproduce this. This is not the way the young brain should work. The different approaches that you have, learning by doing or learning by cases, to provoke thinking of the young people. Okay. So case by case. So I think this is the most important thing. And this is not only in the basic school or elementary school, it's also in the high school, and it's also the same situation as well in the higher education. So I think this is the most important thing. I think that our educational system needs to be changed from the scratch, from the beginning, and this is a must if we want to change this DNA in Serbia.
Rade, what is your view of what is required to get a more entrepreneurial DNA aside of the education? I think maybe we all agree that maybe on education there is a lot of things to be done. What else is required to kind of implant a deeper understanding of what is entrepreneur and to have this DNA, this way of thinking, this way of lifestyle?
Ja lično mislim da u svakom čoveku postoji neka doza i neki motiv za preduzetništvo. Naravno, sada treba to pobuditi. Kako pobuditi? Mislim da se mora da napravi jedna atmosfera u državi. Ja se slažem sa gospodinom da u svemu ovome imamo državu kao kapu koja sve to reguliše. Ali da je činjenica da treba pobuditi, ja ću vam navesti sada, evo ovu godinu, iz ove godine jedan primer. Mi smo imali prošlu godinu kada je cena maline bila fantastična. I to je bio motiv da ove godine imate enormno sađenje maline. Dakle, to je pobudilo kod ljudi interes da sade malinu. Ako pobudimo kod ljudi interes za preduzetništvo i nađemo dobar pelcer kako pobuditi, ljudi će krenuti u preduzetništvo. Međutim, mi moramo na nivou države raščistiti jesmo li mi za privatni biznis ili nismo. Ja lično mislim da mi još to nismo na nivou države, na nivou stanovništva raščistili jesmo li mi za privatni biznis ili nismo. Drugo, da li su svi privatnici tajkuni ili nisu tajkuni? Ja lično mislim da u Srbiji imamo vrlo korektnih i veoma kvalitetnih privatnika. Ja sam bio u žiriju za dodelu nagrade preduzetnih godine u Ernest Youngu. Ja moram da kažem da smo ove godine imali fantastične privatnike o kojima nismo ni čuli, niti ih znamo. Ali kad gledate njihove bilanse, kad gledate njihove pokazatelje, to je fantastično. Srbija ima, dakle, ljudi, i ja se ne slažem da u Srbiji nema motiva za preduzetništvo. Ja mislim da su Srbi veoma radan narod, da je srpski čovek veoma radan čovek, samo ga treba usmeriti u tom pravcu. Dakle, država je ta koja treba da usmeri, da pobudi, što bi rekli, interes za, kao što pobuđuje interes za parove ili ne znam šta, ajde da pobudimo interes za preduzetništvo. Ajde na sredstvima javnog informisanja imamo svaki dan emisiju o preduzetništvu. Ajde da dovodimo dobre preduzetnike koji će reći, gospodo, evo ja sam uspeo, ali ajde da uspete i vi, evo daću vam savete. Dakle, zašto to ne radimo? Zašto? Sada... Međutim...
Can I interrupt you quickly? I hear that very often in Serbia. Serbian people like to, whenever things are not working, when things are difficult, they ask immediately, yeah, well, the government. Okay? And I'm being Swiss, the thing that you least want and where you run away and you push away is the government. Because by default, you don't want the government. I mean, what is entrepreneurship? A government tell you to do something? So I'm not qualifying, but if that's the case, if you're right, and it's about incentivizing the people and the government incentivizing people, then tell us a little bit more what exactly you think should be those incentives that make people or wake up their motives to get entrepreneurs. Because personally, I doubt the government can do that, but maybe it's not. Can you think a little bit?
Vlada svakako u jednoj državi pravi ambijent, stvara ambijent. Taj ambijent stvara što ima veoma jasne zakone, što ima veoma jasne uslove poslovanja u toj državi. Zato se vaša Švajcarska razlikuje od naše Srbije. U tome se razlikuje. Zašto mi u Srbiji ne napravimo jasne zakone, zašto ne napravimo dobar ambijent i to je ta pobuda preduzetništva. Država ne treba da ima ulogu socijale, ulogu nekoga sudije ili ne znam pomagača, ne, njena pomoć je u tome da stvori ambijent. U tom ambijentu svako će naći sebe.
Okay. I disagree, but that's exactly something we can discuss afterwards. But one question, the same question to you in terms now a little bit looked in a different view, because I think one interesting comment that Rade made was we should create the atmosphere of entrepreneurship. There is in New York a great publicity campaign, and the publicity campaign says, I'm a proud New York startup. So it's big everywhere. I'm a proud New York startup, and people kind of take a lot of pride that they are kind of starting something. Here sometimes I have the impression being a startup, people are rather a little bit shy because it's not cool, seems to be. What do you, as an advertising specialist, as somebody who works in this industry, what do you think can be done to kind of build this entrepreneurship DNA? Do we need to make a big campaign? Do the government needs to make a big campaign? Guys, it's cool and great to be entrepreneur. What do you think?
The worst thing you can do is to create a campaign and not act accordingly. Continuously not acting accordingly and to promote the values you don't believe. But I would like to get back to few things which is related to local public sector obsession in terms of employment. I read an article from a director of World Bank for 2014, and in that article he mentioned that 580,000 people working for public sector in Serbia outside of the public companies, and it is 93 persons per 1,000 ratio for Serbia. And since we are all small countries in Balkans, we want to observe what is the neighbor is doing. In most of the cases, people tend to speak that the smallest country, it's Montenegro, is the mostly obsessed country in terms of public sector. The number for Montenegro is 73. So Serbia is went even more further with the ideal to become public sector as a society. So in terms of entrepreneurship, from my perspective, it's not only the ecosystem which is crucial problem. The problem is the general atmosphere which is created by media, where media is not explaining that there is some sort of solution. And when they're explaining that there is a solution, it is on most of the cases some sort of glamorous story about a controversial businessman or maybe some controversial aspects of those controversial businessmen. When I was working in B92, there was an initiative to create some sort of show with startups and people from business who will judge their startups and maybe invest in them. And most of
Shark Tank.
Yeah, Shark Tank. Yeah, and the idea of our correspondents, of our journalists, was 100%. In most of the 100% cases, to invite people who are controversial tycoons and problematic businessmen as a jury, because they don't understand the idea that anonymous entrepreneur is the king of the whole idea. Not someone who is transition champion, someone who was at this exact place at the same exact time and did what he did. So most of the people are not familiar with the success of anonymous people who succeeded in entrepreneurship like this mister did. A few days ago, I get the information from my friend. He works for the bank, that he audited a very small dairy company in Serbia. That dairy company exists for 23 years, and their last papers showed that they showed in terms of revenue and profit, 1,500,000 euros. And they're producing, their core business is the most unglamorous product in terms of milk industry. It's not fruit-induced, probiotic, whatever. They're very, very basic. But the guy just built the company from the scratch for 23 years. And no one knows about him. No one. I didn't even know about him, about his success. And this is the problem of this society. This society is not cherishing the success of anonymous, ordinary people.
Okay. I mean, it's a difficult topic to kind of define what exactly makes an entrepreneur and the DNA, because of course one part is education and the part is dealing with governmental initiatives and how to really get it done. But let's move a little bit to overall the question of what is missing in the Serbian ecosystem to really make it good, big, or kind of something where more entrepreneurs will be coming out of it. And as an idea, let's imagine for a second that what is required, the next Google or Facebook or whatever you want to have, what is required that the next Google comes out of Serbia? What is required that the next Facebook or the next Tesla, if you want, the next electro car, the next electro bike, some really very disruptive technologies and innovations and big companies, what is required that it comes out of Serbia? What are we missing? What do we need to change? What do we need to set up that it comes? And we discussed on the DNA part already. What else is missing? Can you start a little bit?
Okay, I will once get back to the government. Unfortunately, I think this is always the topic when we are discussing about this entrepreneurship. So, for example, compared to other countries, Serbia does not have any kind of tax system or incentive system. I'm a tax guy, just for the audience. There is no, let's say, support for the startups. There is no kind of exemption for a 3-year when it's always the hardest thing. So we don't have this kind of support from the state. We have some other incentives, but this is really not something which is useful for the small entrepreneurs, and this is one of the reasons as well why we don't have so much startups. As a next Google, if I would know direct question, you know, I would be probably next Bill Gates or something like this. But I just want to mention in this part that in Serbia, and I'm not fully aware that everybody knows here, or it's not even publicly promoting that we have kind of a public entity which is called Innovation Fund. Okay. Innovation Fund is existing for the last 3 or 4 years. Innovation Fund is full copy or full replica of Israeli model. So Israel is the one country with the biggest growth of SMEs.
Can you explain a little bit?
Yeah. So basically, Israel has the same innovation fund. They have same 2 types of, let's say, offers for the startups with a smaller amount. In Serbia, it's, I believe it's 80, 100 euros for the startups, and you have this second phase where the companies could receive up to 200,000 euros. Unfortunately, let's say this innovation fund in the last 3 years, and there is no public covering of this, they distributed 6 million euros, and these were all money from IPA, from EU Commission. So right now we have a situation that all this money was distributed, but we don't have any more money. Government is not in position to get this money. So this money is only coming from the EU funds, and the next step is that the World Bank should get some money for this. But what is let's say a crucial problem is that all these companies, the startups with the good ideas, there is a life science companies, there was IT companies. I know this just by some chance because my good friend was working there. You know, you cannot hear for these companies. You cannot hear what happened with them. You cannot hear success stories. You cannot, you know, nobody knows what happened. This is the one part of the story. The other part of the story is that even when we have a good ideas, even when we have, let's say, you have one brilliant mind and he find out something new, he discovered something new. There is a big concern from World Bank, from EBRD, or from all other, let's say, stakeholders, let's call it like this, about, how should I say, investment readiness, you know, because it's a big process from the idea to the setting up of the company. There is, you know, somebody who is brilliant in this, he's not brilliant in finance, he's not brilliant in tax, he's not brilliant in discussing with the investors, he's not brilliant in all other things. And one of the biggest worries is for, let's say, these external stakeholders is that this part of the story. This is their biggest worry, and I think once again, coming to the government, once again, we need to somehow help all these guys to go through this process.
When you look at an ecosystem like San Francisco, there is no government. There is no government involved. But there is lots and lots of accelerators and incubators, and the Founder Institute that we're set up in Serbia is one of them. The Founder Institute is exactly this. It is trying to take people who have a good idea through a process, an educated process, to come up with not a company incorporated that is ready to kind of be financed. Where I'm not, what I read out of that is that in Serbia we're missing We do have money to some extent. We have people, we have science, we have technology. But what we're missing is that kind of putting it all together, that people know actually from an idea how to make it happen. Now my question is, why does that require government? Why does that not kind of, initiatives like so many of these startup incubators that exist all over the world, why are there not coming more here? Why do you think is that the case? Why don't we have other people who help kind of developing these ideas so they become mature companies?
Let's say I'm not an expert in this field in a sense that at least I think we are living in some kind of non-stable environment. So it's very hard in Serbia to, in the same time, be in a profit position and to do some kind of altruistic work. You are always rushing towards the other things and growing. So, but I think it is possible. You need to have a critical mass of quality people with the same idea, with the same vision, and I think it is possible. However, this is then all left to the individuals. Yeah. I don't have anything against it, but I think it would be much faster if somebody, or what the government should do, in which direction we are going in next 20 years, okay. And somebody in the government should think and support this process.
Okay. Mile, same question to you. I mean, you've just recently founded a company.
Yes.
And it's going well.
Okay.
I mean, it's one of the rare examples of something going well. What do you think is required that more of such companies are developed, that more people kind of really step up, found something that hopefully turns into what I said, the next Google? What do you think is required?
Well, I mentioned once again, I think that the way how media covers the ideas of entrepreneurs is highly problematic because for me and for my wife Milica, which is present here, we have lots of questions from people who are working in corporate system and asking us how we did it, because most of people do have their B plan. They have their B plan in leather, but they are not encouraged enough in terms of atmosphere, in terms of values, in terms of perception in society that they should go into that direction. So in most of the cases, the safe haven in this society is public sector or working for the multinational companies. No one wants to be an entrepreneur, especially aside of IT. And on the other side, in terms of IT or net especially, I suppose that you're completely aware of that. Most of IT initiatives were not based on business model where monetizing aspect was developed from the beginning. You have this almost ridiculous situation in some cases where the monetizing system is still not developed, even for huge startups, huge companies, which are very famous for now, at this moment. For example, Twitter is still not profitable for 10 years. It exists for 10 years, it's not profitable. And the reason why it exists still now is the fact that American way of philosophy in terms of investing is completely different, or almost really different than from European, which is much more defensive. You have more agile aspect, more aggressive aspect.
But there you're touching an important point that none of you has touched so far, and I hope we will come to, which comes to the people who put money. People, not banks, angel investors, private people, VC funds, whatever they are, people who kind of back up young people or ideas like that. Why are they not kind of having the attitude that you're just mentioning now? Why are they here more defensive and not kind of, like in America, just giving money and let's see what happens afterwards?
Well, maybe it is related to the experience of this society, which is not, all in roses, especially in the last 20, 25 years. And the background experience is also highly problematic because self-government socialism was some sort of illusion related to sustainability of the society. I think that we don't have angel investors on this market, and I really wonder will they come or not, because in most of the cases people do lend money from their relatives or from banks if they're capable. That's it.
Yeah, that's the 3 Fs: friends, family, fools. These are the...
Okay.
That's
I forgot fools, I'm sorry.
Where you give the money. I mean, there is an angel investor club in Serbia since 5 years, I think.
Yes.
they have invested zero so far. Zero. They have not done any investment. But that's, I think, another topic. I mean, Rade, same question to you. You built your company since a couple of years. You grew it. It's a success. More stories like this would be nice to hear. What do you think it takes that companies like yours are able to spread far beyond Serbia to really be successful abroad? Because you went abroad, but what does it take for a company that grew, that developed, and then has to kind of really go beyond Serbian boundaries? What does it require? What is needed to kind of start really exporting and developing the business big times outside?
Rekao sam vam da izvozimo u 37 zemalja i na moju veliku sreću mi smo mnogo uspešni na zapadu, u inostranstvu, ovdje mnogo ne radimo. Dakle, ja preduzetništvo gledam kao imate jednu državu koja predstavlja jednu njivu. I imate ljude, imate ovo ljudi koji predstavljaju jedno seme. To seme ćete baciti u tu zemlju. Koliko će semenki iznići, zavisi od kako je zemlja obrađena. Kako će te biljke rasti, zavisi od toga da li ih navodnjavate, da li im dodajete veštačka đubriva, da li dodajete prihranu. Dakle, to je ambijent u kome se stvaraju firme. I to je ono što mi, kao što smatram da mi preduzetnici tražimo od države. Ambijent. Taj ambijent, opet ponavljam, podrazumeva jednake uslove za sve, podrazumeva jedne jasne i precizne zakone. Ja ne mogu da se složim, na primjer, da start-up krediti ne postoje u Srbiji. Vi znate da od 2000. godine Fond za razvoj je davao prilično velike iznose start-up kredita koji ja mislim da su vraćeni u iznosu od 10 ili 5%. Dakle, sledeći nemaju start-up kredite jer su sredstva potrošena uzalud. Firme nisu ni postale. Dakle, da ne ispadne sada samo da kritikujem, ali ja smatram da Srbija ima šansu, da ovde uslovi postoje za veoma aktivan razvoj preduzetništva, ali da je osnovno da država stvori ambijent. Taj ambijent će se stvoriti, vidite, za jedan papir koji ja treba da izvadim, da kažem da je to sertifikat o poreklu, ja moram da sedem iz Sirogojna do Beograda da odem i da potrošim ceo dan. Još ako je gospođa u Privrednoj komori možda danas odsutna, ja ću potrošiti 2 dana. Mi poslujemo u takvom ambijentu. Zašto nemamo kancelariju u Užicu vlade, kancelariju svih institucija u Užicu, u Čajetini, u Požegi, gde preduzetnici mogu otići i završiti svoje poslove? Zašto nemamo kancelariju vlade koja će savjetovati ljude kako doći do boljeg rezultata, kako postati dobar preduzetnik?
So if I summarize from 3 entrepreneurs what we heard so far, I mean, there are like 3 topics that are relevant to really replicate or speed up the entrepreneurship. And it seems that the very important one is around the role of the government to really prepare the terrain in such a way that people who have the will and the willingness to really get the things done. Second, that there is a poor, they call it ambiance, a kind of a situation driven by press to some extent, explaining that entrepreneurship is not the most interesting thing and that has to be changed. And the third one is around the DNA itself, the people itself that really have to change and adopt. So these are like 3 hypotheses from these people on what needs to be done. So now we will open the stage, and you contribute. You can ask questions, or you can make your point of view, what you think is relevant or important in that context, or ask questions. Please, let's agree on a couple of rules. Make it very precise, very short. Don't make long statements, so as many people as possible can contribute. So short questions or short statements, whatever you want to do. Please.
Radi mikrofon. Ja ću da se potrudim da budem vrlo kratak, ali moram da napravim kratak uvod. Ja sam 30 godina preduzetnik i radio sam proizvodnju kao što radi gospodin Ljubojević. Radim u medijima i sada kao što radi gospodin Mile, odnosno Milivoje Čalija, a bavio sam se i podrškom, savjetovanjem mladim preduzetnicima, čak sam bio i biznis anđeo. Imam odgovor kako Srbija može da izgleda kao Švajcarska, na kraju ću vama da postavim pitanje da li ste spremni da se u to uključimo. Da li znate, gospodine Boehi, vas pitam, da je Mokrogorska škola menadžmenta već 4 godine praktično i 2 sezone koproducent televizijskog serijala koji promoviše preduzetništvo. I u tom serijalu naš heroj je bio gospodin Ljubojević i mi smo njega proglasili herojem. U Srbiji su preduzetnici kao što je gospodin Ljubojević, baš zato što ne može da ode do Užica, da registruje i da uradi ono što mu treba, heroj. To smo mi uradili. Ne, to je stvarno tačno. Kad sam upoznao Milivoja Čaliju, ja sam došao kod njega sa idejom da Srbija izgleda kao Švajcarska i da bude kao Švajcarska. Ideja je bila da napravimo televizijski serijal koji se zove Super štediša i prva epizoda je trebala da bude i serijal Koliko bacamo i jako smo siromašni. Nisu nam dali da to emitujemo na jednoj televiziji jer smo napravili emisiju o cigaretama gde smo naveli informacije da Srbija godišnje potroši 2 milijarde evra, baci ih praktično u đubre. Kad je Bogdan pričao o inovacijama... Da, idem na point. Naravno, kad je Bogdan pričao o inovacijama, u Srbiji postoji fantastične stvari. Naprimer, postoji grupa ljudi koja je napravila e-street light sistem koji se preko kolovoza prostire i može da obezbedi uličnu rasvetu tako što se sa tog kolovoza ta energija prenosi praktično na tu uličnu rasvetu. Poenta je u sledećem. Srbija može da bude Švajcarska samo ako se mi ujedinimo, povežemo i da nam država ne smeta. Znači, i to samo na osnovu kvaliteta. Da li vaša fondacija može da učestvuje u tome? To je poenta, vas pitam.
You mean the Founder Institute? Or what are you talking about?
Vi kao prijatelj Srbije i taj institut koji trenutno ovde vodite i predstavljate.
Are you asking me now?
Da.
Well, I think I am participating in this more than many other people. I founded the Founder Institute here. I brought it here. I already brought 30 startup companies in the last 3 months that we're going through this process. I founded a venture capital fund that is focusing on agrotech and food tech, and we're putting money into Serbian companies. So I'm thinking I am the wrong person to kind of address here because I'm probably doing more than anyone else. But the point is another one. I think the discussion is not about me. The discussion is about what can be done in a way to kind of generate more of this kind of initiatives. And I think it's not about hanging medals around. I do fully appreciate every single person getting a medal here, but it's not about getting medals. It's about setting up a system that encourages and enables people who have great ideas, great technologies to really succeed and build up sustainable companies that stay in this country. Because I can tell you, many of these startup companies, half of them are going to the US. Why are they going to the US? Because there they find the money. There they find the circumstances how they very easily can develop. None of these companies is staying here. There is a few exceptions. Nordeus is one of the companies that you might know that is growing big, very successful. But 80% of all the companies that are founded here that have a potential to really create jobs, taxes, revenue, growth are all going out. Why? Because they don't find the terrain here. Because they don't find the situation here. And I'm just asking, why are they all going? I'm asking the 3 experts that are here. I'm asking you that are sitting in this room, that are all CEOs and all people that kind of have the power to move stuff, or supposedly have the power to move stuff. What are we going to do to stop this kind of brain and blood drainage going away and making sure that these people stay here? That's my question to all of you.
Imam odgovor. Vi ste potpuno u pravu. Firma E-Street Light, koja je dobila nagradu za najbolju tehnološku inovaciju, nije uspela da nađe u Srbiji novac da to uradi, nije dobila novac od Fonda za razvoj i oni su otišli u Sjedinjene države i tamo su napravili svoju firmu. A ono što mi već radimo, to je ovo što sam vam rekao sa Mokrogorskom školom menadžmenta, mi promovišemo preduzetništvo već 4 godine, trudimo se da stvorimo ambijent, a najvažnije je da se preduzetnici između sebe umreže, jer od države ne mogu mnogo da očekuju. 16 milijardi dinara koje država deli ove godine nisu ništa u poređenju sa novcem koji se davao za promašene strane investicije i start-up fondove, ali kao što ste rekli, ja bih da budem kratak pa da neko drugi nastavi da priča. Hvala vam.
Yeah. Do other people have comments or ideas or suggestions? Please.
Yeah, my name is Vladimir Čupić. I'm currently working as a director in a regional company, Atlantic Group, which is basically food and allied business. I used to be a CEO of 2 banks. Before that, I was director of privatization agents. And before that, I worked in Deloitte. And I also own a winery. And I got 4 of my friends. We set up a company there. And I'm the principal investor. They don't have as much cash as I do. Registered everything going through 100% legal channels. So there's no gray money, there's no black money, there's nothing. I'm paying taxes on an annual basis, personal income tax. Tax authority has never considered a single opportunity to make any tax relief for investments which I've made. Why? That speaks about a conducive environment for doing business. I'm not going to speak about support or subsidies. A Slovenian, a friend of mine who is also Serbian, works with me in the company, he inherited 1 hectare of land in Slovenia, and he wants to build a vineyard. I gave him an idea. Slovenian government is funding the whole vineyard, so 24,000 euros per month for the growing of the vineyard, and 3 years of lost profit until the grapes start yielding. So Serbian government doesn't have these capacities. We've never used that. So we grew business. Basically, it was a hobby in the beginning. Now it's a business which is earning a net close to 40,000 euro.
Can you, sorry, can you ask a question?
No, I'm not going to, I don't want to ask a question because I don't know whom to ask. All these people pretty much think the same. Yeah. I want to give you an example. If you want to promote people, or if you want to bring them to do kinds of things, you have to provide environment. And you've been rightfully speaking about ecosystem. This is probably a new word. I'm speaking about environment. And you're permanently trying to say the government is not important. The government is defining the environment. There's a reason why people are fleeing to the United States, whether because there is an environment or there's a lack of government intervention in their business. You've yourself tried to set up several or assist several startups or multitude of startups. Tell me, how would those startups effectively make money in Serbia? How would they, can they go to a stock exchange? Can they go public? Not a single company in Serbia has ever gone public or sold shares to public ownership. Is there any incentives to invest? And lastly, do you think Bill Gates would be popular in Serbia? Would be considered a decent businessman? Please answer the question. No, I'm asking you. Do you believe Bill Gates would be considered? No, Mr. Do you consider Bill Gates would be considered a proper businessman in Serbia?
Again, I think you're addressing the question to the wrong person.
No, I'm just asking for your opinion.
I'm happy if I'm not the most important in the room, and I'm happy to answer questions, but I think the ones that you should be asking are the rest of the peers here, because at the end of the day, this question, or this group here, kind of needs to ask itself, are we going to wait till something happens in the government, maybe into a certain direction, or is there something that we can do about that?
I did something about it.
I'm fine.
I did.
I'm not questioning.
That's why I can ask a question.
But is there something that can be done in any way? I mean, whatever kind of initiative that comes out of a group like this. You were mentioning some things out of the Mokrogorska Business School. Initiatives that come out of here that state like this and this and this and this is required. We as the CEOs of whatever, the joint CEOs of Mokrogorska, we think these are the 5, 6, 7 bullet points that are needed to change in this country in order to get there. My point is always, I know that we are all smart, and I know we are all smart in describing, and we're all smart in kind of justifying things, and we're all smart in kind of explaining things. But I always see that we're short in kind of defining what is the alternative, what needs to be done in order to get somewhere. And that's actually what I would like to a little bit provoke and hear if there are things. You went the way by saying, I will do my stuff, and you achieved your way. You as well, you're going your way, and it's perfectly fine.
That's the definition of entrepreneurship.
And that's entrepreneurship, exactly. But still, we heard that apparently it's a very limiting factor, the issue of the government. So my question goes to the rest of the people. What is your impression? What do you think? What is required? What are we missing? Because obviously it's not as we want it to be. What else can be done? Besides somebody just says, hey, I'll just get it done, which I think is the right way to do, personally. Other thoughts, comments? Please don't be shy. I think everyone has a comment or an opinion on that.
Okay, I'm the... this lovely gentleman is my husband, so I'm a co-owner of Angel oatmeal cookies. What we need in Serbia is we need to work, and there is very few of us really want to work. It's when we talk about entrepreneurship, it sounds really glamorous, like we control our own time, we control our own business, but in fact there are some days when we work for, I don't know, like 16 hours a day. There are days when we don't need to work and we choose not to work because we want to spend time with our kids. But most of all, I think that people in Serbia, it will sound harsh, but they are lazy. I made an appearance in a TV show a few weeks ago, and a lot of people were present. The whole show was about people who have lost a job. Some women there, they made statements like, I've lost a job 16 years ago and I'm still waiting for it. She's waiting for it. And she was in some sewing company, which means that she can do sewing. She can make things. She can make dresses. She can make something.
So what do you suggest? I mean, it's clear what you're saying. People are lazy. Okay. So what do you draw as a conclusion out of that? What needs to be done differently?
Well, I don't really know the aim of motivation, but they need to be motivated, and they need to be, in terms of what a government can do, a government needs to be more open, because we get a lot of questions like, can you really live after you pay all your taxes? Because what people imagine is a way more... it's harder. It's not as hard as they imagine it, I think. They are afraid to even try because they don't want to go to ask questions, which is normal because the whole system tax inspectors is really very close, and you don't get any kind of education as entrepreneur. You learn things hard way. Like you make a mistake, you pay for it, and then you learn.
But even if you make mistake, you are not sure whether it's a mistake, because the next time there could be a different approach, okay, for the same thing.
And,
so
and very often, and very often they say, well, yeah, it's our mistake, but you have to pay for it now, and you will get back that money later, but you have to pay for it now because we can't see your money in our system. We can't see that you pay your taxes. So that's one thing. I think all those systems must be more open and more, it must be simpler.
Okay. Other comments? Yeah, please.
One potential comment and maybe solution. Beyond talks about taxes, governments, etc., business angels, I think we should go one step back. That the gentleman said at the beginning, it's about education. We should go even one step back, and I think Mariana will tell something about this tomorrow. Peter Drucker said that culture kills the strategy, or eats strategy for breakfast. One potential solution, very easy, it's don't tie shoelaces of your kids when they are 10 years old. That's what parents are doing in Serbia.
Well, probably everywhere, unfortunately.
So learn them to tie the shoelaces at the age of 5.
Just to add, maybe.
Yeah, please, Mariana, please go ahead.
I will mention, I'm Marijana Agić-Molnar, and because I'm coming from a research company, I will share some data with you. We did a study recently and compared Serbia with other countries in our neighborhood from the region. And then we asked people what is important to succeed in life. Is it education, hard work, being lucky, or having good connections? And surprise, surprise, in Serbia, dominant features for success are actually to have a luck and having good connections. And cultures in other countries are different. For example, in Albania or Kosovo, education is much more important and much more valued, and personal work. If you imagine... education is really important because it's deficit. Yeah. It shows, this data actually shows the culture in Serbia. I don't know if you have some data or you read about the culture in Serbia and determinants of Serbian culture. We are the least risk-taking nation in Europe. So it's how we teach our children, how we raise them. Not make any risks. Look at the neighbor, he works in a public company. This is good for you, this is a good choice for you. And we had once a training with a culturologist. He showed, he gave an excellent example about about this trait of our culture. He showed all ladies in the room. There was about 30 of us in the room, 10 ladies. And he put a finger on all of us. Look, you all have the same haircuts. And actually we all had, and we were in like 30s, 40s, and we all had a very similar haircut. We don't want to be different. We don't want to, it's easier for us not to be embarrassed. It's easier to sit in a cafe and drink coffee instead of risking and making a business and maybe fail and then somebody will make a fun of us. So it's a huge think about how you raise your kids. It's what we deliver to the next generation. So it's not easy to be an entrepreneur in Serbia because our culture is not entrepreneurial, and we are the least entrepreneurial in Europe, and that's what figures show.
And let me
what
ask,
we
sorry,
can do.
let me ask one or add one thing. I mean, in all the companies that I had in Serbia, from Imlek, Bambi, and Knjaz, which probably when you take together is probably the largest group, except Atlantic in the region, but we were beating you guys on a couple of brands, so we're proud of that. But one of the things when we bought the companies and took over the companies, what was extremely striking was, and these are employees, was the attitude of the employees and what it took us to kind of really get into more empowerment and into a more entrepreneurial spirit of our employees. And it was really striking how the people were defensive. I mean, they were kind of, defensive, justifying all the time, finding excuses for everything, and it takes a lot of time to really change the mindset of the people to recognize, hey, it's better to make a shit and then to apologize than not to do anything. And we really took us at least 3-4 years to change this culture in the entire group that we had. It paid off. So what you're saying on a society, I was not aware, it's very interesting because exactly this I found on the company side as well, with the difficulties to kind of really change it into a more proactive entrepreneurial spirit. And that takes me a little bit to the people here that are not entrepreneurs, but they are, as we asked before at the beginning, 90% of you are working in corporations. Corporations are as well entrepreneurs. What is your view on entrepreneurship maybe inside the companies? How do you see that? Are you facing with these kind of things and you see founders in front of you? Yes, please.
Just you mentioned, I'm CEO of one big corporation called Energo Project. Probably you heard about it. I just wanted to comment on these cultural issues and the young generation that is having education that we have and that is living in the environment that we have. What is the problem? They had a very hard time over the young years. You know, last 25 years were very difficult in Serbia. Whoever is now in position to start its own business, it's a dead generation, 25 to 35 years. They experienced something that was really terrible. It's a one-time experience, and that left some consequences on each and every one of us. On the other hand, that generation is not aware what's happening outside of Serbia. They simply did not have an opportunity to travel around, to see other countries where life is not really easy or much harder than what we are experiencing here in Serbia. So they are not able maybe to compare. You know. They are basing most of the informations on their circles, the people they are dealing with internet information, and they are placing their pictures. What I can say from the corporate perspective, first I would like to comment on education. Our policy is that all universities, licensed universities, are equal, no matter it is state-owned. We can all draw the line between or compare state-owned university or faculty or privately owned. We know the differences, but it has to be the policy not every bright and clever young man in today's society of Serbia has the money to study where he wants. So everybody should have a chance. And I can tell you there are many good young experts coming from very poor universities. I mean, purely ranked universities. So basically, corporations need to establish their own system of evaluation of the candidates for different jobs.
Okay. Can you a bit wrap it up so we have chance?
Yeah, I would like to say that young people or anyone challenging himself to start private business, he has a chance, but he needs more information about how does it work. Once he kick off with good idea, gentlemen mentioned some inventions, we are trying also to help from our perspective. The young people, they have ideas, but they don't know how the system works. And I can tell you, I worked in many countries before, for many years. There is no difference. There is no free market anywhere. Everywhere you have to fight. There is no place where government will secure any job for you. You have to fight for it. It's a hard way, but the glory of success is something that worth trying for.
You want to comment on this?
No. I just, because I received an SMS from the friend and he had a fabulous idea about it. He is watching right now. One of the things we did not mention today is so-called, and this is a sexy name for this, reverse brain drain. So we have a lot of people abroad. We have a lot of, we may say that, you know, the brightest one left the country in the last 25 years. And we need to find a way to get them back. We need to find as well the way to motivate the people who already earn the money abroad to come here. But unfortunately, I just want to share one information that I had. I don't know where did I hear, but one of the top 5 richest women in Canada is from our country. Okay, and she wanted to do the patriotic act to come here to invest, and she met with a few guys from the government. And we all know what is her answer, you know.
Well, then
she didn't want to come here and spend time with this kind of guys, you know. And she didn't want to invest in Serbia.
Yeah. Thank you. You had a comment?
Da, ja ću imati 2 pitanja za vas. Pošto je večeras bilo više puta postavljeno pitanje od strane vaše, postavili ste pitanje kako možemo mi postati Švajcarska. Ja ću vam reći nikako, evo vi me demantujte. Zato što karte su odavno podeljene i razvijene zemlje ne dozvoljavaju...
I didn't ask this one. I didn't ask this.
Razvijene zemlje ne mogu dostići, ne daju da se dostigne taj nivo od strane nerazvijenih i zemalja u razvoju. I sami ste već vidite da i ovo što se desilo u Jugoslaviji bivšoj i što se dešava u svetu sa Tunisom, sa Libijom, sa Irakom, sa Iranom, sa Sirijom, to su sve smišljena razaranja svih zemalja koje su iskoračile malo. Tako da nama preostaje samo da budemo manje siromašni ili više siromašni. I prema tome nikada niko od nas neće dočekati da neka zemlja bude od ovih Švajcarska. A vi možda da me demantujete sa nekim primjerom, ali da mi ne navodite zemlje koje imaju u dvorištu izvor nafte. I moje drugo pitanje, samo da mi odgovorite kako se to rešava u Švajcarskoj. Ja imam dobar program, imam sve, treba mi 200.000 da otpočnem, imam i od banke odobreno to, nemam s čim da garantujem da bi to podigao. Kako se to rešava u Švajcarskoj?
Can I just try at least to put my statement on this first? You know, the easiest thing in the world is always to say... Najlakše je u životu uvek da je neko drugi kriv. Pa ne, pričamo sada, karte su podeljene, pa nisu podeljene, mi moramo sami da uradimo nešto da bismo promenili to. Možda imamo smetnje trenutno, ali ne znači da ćemo imati za 20 godina, znate? A mi sami sebi smo najveći krivci, niko drugi nam nije kriv.
Ja sam samo rekao da budemo manje siromašni, apsolutno možemo, ali da budemo Švajcarska ne možemo.
Dobro, to se slažem, mislim. Nemamo ni roze kravu.
Mogu jednu repliku vezanu za dijasporu i za tvoj poziv dijaspori i za to kako da budemo Švajcarska. Mi smo se bavili idejom kako da organizujemo zajednički izvoz svega što ima kvalitet iz Srbije, jer nama pre svega treba izvoz. Trebaju nam tržišta. Mi to možemo da uradimo samo ujedinjeni. Tu je gospodin Čupić iz Atlantika, Hrvatska je duboko prodala u Srbiju, napravila svoje prodajne lance. Srbi nemaju ni jedan svoj prodajni lanac nigde van Srbije, osim Lilija koji ima mali prodajni lanac u Bugarskoj. Sve znamo zašto. Gotovo. Karte su podeljene. Idemo dalje. Ali kako mi možemo da dođemo do naše dijaspore? Ne da je pozovemo da se vrati samo ovde da investira, nego da ona bude naš partner, da mi napravimo sa njom prodajni lanac tamo i da oni budu naši partneri, tako što treba da napravimo naš kvalitet, da ga objedinimo u jednoj radnji, da tu bude gospodin Ljubović i sve što ima kvalitet, jer naša dijaspora, prema istraživanjima FON-a, raspolaže efektivom od 300 milijardi evra. Znači, to je to. Mi treba da idemo u tom pravcu i da se bavimo time i da idemo na izvoz, ne samo da izvezete vi sami, nego mi svi zajedno i da gotove proizvode radimo. Hvala.
Radi. Ako mogu nešto kažem, I'm sorry.
Please. And then we need to wrap up because
I will be
of
short.
time.
Mi kao društvo smo skloni da imamo neverovatan pristup toj makro perspektivi gde posmatramo stvari šire, umesto da posmatramo možda malo uže ili možda iz lične perspektive. Ambicija moje porodice nije da postanemo Švajcarci, ali kada smo formirali našu ideju, jedan od ključnih pitanja koje smo sebi postavili, bilo ih je jako puno, da li našu ideju možemo da iznesemo ovde, u Švajcarskoj, u Finskoj, u Rusiji ili u Velikoj Britaniji. I pošto je u pitanju ovseni kolač, Rusi imaju jako dugačku tradiciju ovsenjeg kolača, Britanci takođe, Amerikanci takođe, Italijani takođe. I kad smo shvatili da je naš kolač barem u istoj ravni sa tim kolačima, tek smo onda ušli u posao. Znači nismo ni pokušali da pravimo srpsku verziju ili lokalnu verziju koji će biti smuti po prospi, nego da napravimo najbolje što možemo i da vidimo da li se nalazimo u istoj ravni. Prema tome, biznis u suštini nema nekakav nacionalni preznak, mi smo odlučili da živimo u Srbiji, proizvod je proizveden u Srbiji, ali je standard koji smo postavili zapravo svetski. To je radio gospodin koji se bavi trikotažom i proizvodnim albumom. Tako da je jako bitno da povremeno osim te makro perspektive, gde svi možemo biti jako pametni i vrlo lucidni, da posmatramo stvari iz mikro perspektive, šta mi kao pojedinci možemo da doprinesemo ovom društvu. Jer ako svako od 6 miliona razmišlja na taj način u Srbiji, možda se nešto pomeri. Ako svi posmatramo tu top-down perspektivu, ništa se neće pomeriti kao što se i ne pomeri.
Yeah. This was your last, is that okay? Can you make a statement and you at the end a statement on this to wrap up the discussion? Your conclusions.
We don't need to be a Switzerland. It's okay to be a Netherlands as well. It would be enough.
Not be a Switzerland. That's, for me, it's very important. We should not be Switzerland.
In a way.
In any way. We should be Serbia. That's it.
Exactly, but I think if you mean about the people and the culture, we should not be. But I think it was thought about the economy. Yeah, I understand fully. Yeah. I don't like either these kind of things in Switzerland. So just from my point of view, okay, we also, I just want to mention a few other things and we discussed about the SME sector going outside, okay? I think that, I'm once again getting back to the government. Hopefully they will not watching this. Export Agency, Development Bank, Serbian Chamber of Commerce. These are all tools used in many other countries as a support for the foreign business. Unfortunately, we have 10, 15, 20 years of experience that there is no real support, and even as gentleman mentioned, even when there is the money, it's like, brother's policy, I will give you money, not the good project. But I think important point is Serbian Chamber of Commerce. This is a bunch of guys who are doing nothing. Okay, there is a changes in recent times, and there is an initiative in this way, and they're moving in the right direction. But I think that's an important thing for Serbian SME to go outside the country. I will just tell you one example about two investors that we had in last week. We have one Russian company and we have one US company. They're both starting operations in Serbia. And my colleague who is here, I don't have a hair, but he starts pulling his hair out because the Russian guys, they do not have experience in going out from Russia. you know, and it's very hard for them even to pay the consultants or to go something else. Totally other approaches from the US, you know. They know that they know nothing about Serbia, and they take the right guys to support them. This is also something which we need from Serbia. So we need a chamber, we need to have a support that somebody wants to go to that country to go in this direction.
Good. Rade, conclusion from your side, recommendations?
Ja sam bio privatnik i u Nemačkoj i privatnik sam u Srbiji. I moram da kažem da ni tamo nije lako biti preduzetnik, iako sada gledamo ili Švajcarsku ili Nemačku kao obećane zemlje, dakle i tamo je teško opstati, konkurencija ogromna. Konkurencija i ovde, a ovde imamo i tu još dodatak da imamo ambijent koji je neuporediv sa tim ambijentom. Dakle, ja mislim da i oni koji razmišljaju da budu preduzetnici i oni koji su preduzetnici moraju da shvate da preduzetnik je obaveza, preduzetnik mora da bude strpljiv. Ne možete danas da registrujete firmu, a sutra da uskočite u Mercedesa. Ne možete da vozite Mercedesa da niste platili 6 meseci plate. I ne možete onda da se samo ljutite na radnike i na ambijent i na sve ostalo. Dakle, i privatnici moraju svoje shvatanje u Srbiji malo da promene. Preduzetnici, da, ili privatnici. Radnici takođe moraju svoje shvatanje da promene. Oni rade za sebe, oni ne rade za gazdu. Oni rade za sebe da zarade svoju platu. Ja takođe ne mislim da ćemo mi ni za 2-3 godine postati Švajcarska, ali mislim, niti želim da postane Švajcarska, ali želim da moj radnik, ako radnik u Švajcarskoj ima 4.000 eura platu, da moj radnik ima bar 2.000. To je moj cilj. Hvala vam.
Thank you very much for this discussion. We achieved what I wanted, a provocative discussion, and it seems that the topic really is heated up, and for many it's even emotional, as we can see. So I think, thank you very much for participating, and I do hope that this group of kind of leaders of this country comes up with ideas how to promote more entrepreneurship. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Zahvalim i Danielu i ostalim sagovornicima. Vidite koliko mi maštamo o tome, moj je život Švicarska. A vraćamo se u realnost. Ja molim Nevenu Mašić da ustane. I Nevena, reci nešto, gde ljudi treba da dođu, šta treba da rade, šta treba da obuku i tako dalje.
Sportska oprema za pola sata, odnosno za 25 minuta, sala, da li košarkaška ili ovo?
Jedina košarkaška.
Velika sala, prijeći vam posle 4 i verovatno više sati sedenja.
Ko nema opremu, šta da radi?
Pa može nešto. Snažit ćemo se, neće biti ništa pretrano
Hoće da boli, hoće da boli.
Neće biti ništa pretrano naporno, samo malo da se razmrda.
Znači, razmrdavanje za pola sata u sali.